Okay, so you should be able to see my screen now. Let's see. Tell me if I'm. But yeah, today we're going to talk about how to fund reparations. What are some practical ways of doing it? How does the government fund itself? How how does it pay for things today? How you doing, A Boogie? So we're going to talk about how the government funds things today. What's the difference between taxes and bonds? How was the 2008 financial crisis paid for? How was the 2020 COVID crisis paid for? How can reparations be paid for? And how can we do it in a way that's politically feasible? So that's going to be the main topic of today. Um, y'all can click the Friedman News stream if you want to watch along and follow my screen. Give me 1 second. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is just share a video. Um, Actually, share two videos to give context. Um, they're pretty short, but they'll be kind of like important in the sense that they'll kind of give us some context to what we're going to talk about from here. So the first video is a Wall Street Journal video, and it says how the government creates stimulus money. So this is going to talk about how it paid for, how the United States paid for the trillions of dollars spent during COVID. So let's do that.
When the economy stalled in mid-March, businesses shut down almost overnight, and quickly, millions of workers became unemployed. Within weeks, the government moved to provide trillions of dollars of stimulus relief to workers and businesses throughout the economy.
$1,200 checks to anyone who makes less than $75,000.
This is another $600 a week for 4 months.
Congress approving another $484 billion for loans.
So where does all this money come from? Is it taxpayer funds? Is the government printing a bunch of new cash? As you might expect, there's a lot more to know. Congress can authorize taxes to pay for new spending, but that's not where the stimulus money is coming from. That money is being raised through borrowing. The government expects to borrow a record $4.5 trillion for the fiscal year that ends in September. That's more than 3 times the $1.28 trillion it borrowed the year prior. That borrowed money is being used to subsidize small business payrolls, send checks to households, and offer taxpayers a temporary holiday on making tax payments. The Treasury Department is in charge of the borrowing. The agency borrows by selling Treasury bills or bonds to the 3 main groups of savers. The public sector, like other parts of the government. The private sector, which includes companies or individuals like you and me, and foreign entities. These bills are like IOUs. Someone agrees to buy them, and the government agrees to pay them back with a little bit of interest. In the meantime, the government can use that borrowed money for stimulus to support private individuals and companies or state and local governments.
This year, the federal government will get most of its borrowing from the private sector. And the reason for that is because private borrowers who would normally be competing with the federal government for private saving have basically disappeared.
That stimulus money can make the economy larger than it otherwise would have been. It encourages employers to keep people employed, and it encourages individuals to spend. Here's a hypothetical example. Congress authorizes $1 billion in stimulus spending. The Treasury would borrow $1 billion by selling Treasury bills. It would then use that borrowed money on the stimulus programs, with the hopes of keeping the economy churning. But it doesn't end there. If the economy keeps moving, households and businesses can keep earning income, and some of that income can be saved. And in the future, they can use those savings to invest in more Treasury bills, supplying the government with more money to spend.
The amount of saving in the economy is not a fixed amount. Federal stimulus can actually result in more people working, more firms having profits, higher incomes than would have been the case if there hadn't been any federal stimulus at all. This is known as Keynesian stimulus, named for the British economist John Maynard Keynes, who first came up with the concept back in the 1930s. The government is not like a family that has a fixed amount and can't borrow more than it can pay back because it'll go bankrupt. Government can, in effect, borrow enough to actually make the economy bigger.
Now, on top of the three main sources of borrowing, there's another source too, the Federal Reserve. The central bank is like the other sources, but with a key difference. The Fed can raise funds to buy treasuries by simply printing money.
So when we say the Fed is printing money, we don't literally mean it's firing up the printing presses and creating paper money. Instead, what we mean is the Fed basically clicks a button and credits the Treasury's account with this money. It's electronic money, it's not paper money.
In effect, the Treasury sells a bond and in return gets brand new money. Right now, the Fed is ramping up its lending. Assets on the central bank's balance sheet topped $6.7 trillion during the first week of May 2020. That gives the Treasury more money to spend on stimulating the economy and other programs. Critics of the stimulus say the government competing with other borrowers for savings will push up interest rates, making it harder for private companies and individuals to borrow and invest. They also say that if the Fed prints money to finance the borrowing, that will lead to inflation and economic turmoil like what's seen in Venezuela and the trillion-dollar notes seen in Zimbabwe.
It's only a problem if they print and they print and they print and those dollars get spent and spent and spent again until all that spending far exceeds the supply of goods and services in our economy. That's when you get high inflation. How will we know that's happening? Well, we probably see long-term interest rates start to rise as investors get ready for the approach of inflation. Then we'd start to see actual inflation rise, but we're not seeing that now.
First video I want to share. So in the meantime, I'm kind of going to talk about like what that video talked about and like why it's important to this conversation. Firstly, we should understand how money actually gets spent in the government. How do they raise money at all? And then how are things approved? What's the process? Right now, we did two calculations for reparations. The first is based on the calculations for the 40 acres and a mule. The second calculation is for the Freedmen Bank. And then third calculation is for the value of our 4 million ancestors' labor and skills. Now, if you look at each of those numbers individually, the Freedmen Bank, 100,000 freedmen saved up $57 million in 1874, 9 years past emancipation. The modern day equivalent of that is 1.36 trillion. Then you look at the 40 acres. That was worth 400 million in 1865. You run that at 7% interest compounding, it's the modern day equivalent of $17 trillion. And it also is equivalent to the racial wealth gap that Darity calculated. The last calculation that we did is for the 4 million ancestors and what their labor and skills were valued at. In 1860, they were valued at $4 billion. If you run that at 7% interest, it's 246 trillion in 2023 dollars. So if you combine all of those together and divide it by the 42 million freedmen, that's about $6 million in reparations for each freedman, right? Now, the other calculation we did is for the Compensated Emancipation Act. In 1862, Lincoln signed an executive order that paid reparations not to freedmen but to slave owners, and for each slave that became a freedman upon emancipation, they gave that owner $300. And there were about 983 or something like that petitions that were filed by slave owners, and there were about 3,000 freedmen that were emancipated. Now, that's a 1-to-3 ratio, which means that there was one slave or 3 slaves to one slave master on average, right? And what this means is when you run the 7% interest on that $300, That's the modern day equivalent of $16 million per freedman. And with that 1-to-3 ratio, it also means that on average, each slave owner got paid the modern day equivalent of $45 million, right? So just understanding that 6 million being the low end on our calculation from the 40 Acres Freedmen Bank and the value of our ancestors' labors and skills, 16 million being the high end in terms of the bare minimum, in terms of the $300 per freedman that was from the Emancipation Act. Sorry. And so if you divide that and think about what would be the annual payout the government would have to make in order to afford this bill, what would it look like? And we've done two calculations based on that. One is based on the average life expectancy of a freedman. The national average expectancy based on the CDC data is around like 79, 78 years. For freedmen, it's about 75 years. And so if we use that as an understanding, well, if we on average live 75 years, what would a lifetime payment look like? If you just use 75 years as the metric and you say everyone will get their 6 million or 16 million over 75 years, that would be about $1 trillion a year that the government would have to pay. And then if you do 16 million for every freedman, that would be about $3 trillion a year that the government would have to pay out. So these are actually feasible numbers, right? Now, the other thing that we looked at in terms of calculations are, not everyone may live 75 additional years, right? So like, let's say you're already 75, right? Let's say you're older than 75. Then what do you do, right? And so we looked into that and we basically looked at what would be the maximum payment. Actually, let me switch my screen so y'all can see what I'm seeing. I pulled up all the data that the CDC has and the census has on our ages. Basically, with census data, you can look at what is the Black demographics for our ages, like how many people are 5 years old, how many people are 75 years old, 90 years old, etc. The only unfortunate part is the data is only within like 5-year brackets. So like if you're under 5 or 5 years old, if you're 5 to 9 years old. So I'm kind of having to use rough estimates right now. I can't break it down by year individually between these yet. But what I did to try to fix that is I just used the uppermost limit. Like just assume that there's instead of like 3 million people that are under 5 years, just say like there's 3 million people that are 5 years old. That gives us the maximum amount of cost. So we can create like an upper limit, like, no matter what the numbers break down to, it will never be higher than this, right? And then I'm going to look into like trying to break it down, but like this is just based on the census data, right? So here's how you do this calculation. You take, if you're 74 years or older, you basically get one payment, right? If we're doing it in this more like, think of it as like prorated. If you're 74 years or older, you get all your 6 million or 16 million at once, right? Because, you're only likely to be expected to live like a year, right? Like based on the CDC data, right? Now, if you're less than 74 years old, then you basically take your age or you take 75 and then you subtract your age. That'll be the number of years you have a payout. And then the other thing you look at is you take the total amount of compensation, 6 million or 16 million, and you divide it by 75 minus your age. That'll give you your annual payout. So I did the calculations for Darity and for me, and then I built a program where we could put in our ages and get the answer. So for me, I'm 28. So let me share that so y'all can kind of see the program because it's kind of cool. So, okay, I'm 28, right? So if I enter my age, it'll give me the calculation on that. Let me switch screens really quickly. Okay, so if I'm 28, for a $6 million compensation, I would have 47 years of lifetime payments. and I'd have 127K a year, right? If it was 16 million, it would still be 47 years, but it would be 340K a year. Now, if you're like Darity's age and you're like 69, he would get at $1 million a year for 6 years, or at $16 million in compensation, it would be 2.6 million a year for 6 years, right? For the 60 million. So, for fun, does anybody want to give me their age, and I'll put in the number, and we'll see what it breaks down to for you. Okay, 37. Let's see. Okay, so for 37, you have 38 years of lifetime payments, 157K a year at $6 million in total, right? At 16 million, still 38 years, but 421K a year. How about you, Shauna? You want to see what it would come up with?
Yeah, I don't want to give my age, but I do have a 17-year-old. So can you check what that will look like?
Yeah. So
for a 17-year-old?
For a 17-year-old, it would be 58 years, 103K a year at $6 million, or 58 years for 275K a year. Can you hear me?
Yeah, no, that's good.
Yep.
Thank you.
Of course. And so if we go back and look at the breakdown, here's the maximum calculations that it would cost in terms of if we did this like breakdown, right? For people that are under like 34 years, the max total that the government would have to pay a year is 2.3 trillion, which again is like, these are doable numbers. For everybody who was 64 years or younger, it would be 5.2 trillion. So again, still doable numbers. And then when it comes to people who are 75 or older, it'd be 10 trillion total. But then once you do that in that year, that you don't have to pay it again the next year, right? It's just like that one big lump sum. And so basically after the first year, the payments would be basically around like $7 to $8 trillion a year. And then that number would decrease over time as people reach their payments, their payouts. So that one is doable. Some people may in Congress like quibble about the large initial payout of like say 10 trillion. So one thing we could do if we actually need to do this politically is we could make it like we could cap the annual payment at $1 million a year, and they would just get paid out over 6 years, right? And that would reduce the annual payment by a sixth, right? So it would still be kind of within the ballpark. So these are some things that we can consider, and that's why I kind of want to get more into like how money is actually, how things are paid for. So for example, I was looking at the COVID numbers. Here's the numbers for COVID. So about $1 trillion in administrative actions, $6 trillion in legislative actions, and the Federal Reserve purchased about $7.1 trillion dollars worth of like bonds from the Treasury. So that's about, $15 trillion right there. And if we look at the IRS, there's basically two ways that the government makes money, like tax revenue, which at the most right now is about 4.1 trillion. And then the rest, like they said in that video, they do by borrowing. So for all this COVID money, they couldn't raise enough tax money to pay for COVID stimulus checks and PPP loans and all of that. What they did is they sold treasury bonds to the Federal Reserve and to other people in the private and public market. And they basically gave money to the Treasury Department, which then they sent out to everybody. And the Federal Reserve is special because there's the Treasury Department, which is an executive branch position and department, and then you have the Federal Reserve, which is it has all the same requirements. Like both the head of the Fed and the head of the Treasury Department are nominated by the president and confirmed by the Senate, but the Federal Reserve are not part of the White House cabinet. So like it's one that and the SEC are like a few that aren't, right? So, anyways, the point is the Treasury Department can make um, sales of Treasury bonds, but they can only print the amount of money that the Fed like agrees to. So, something gets passed in Congress for how much it costs. The Treasury Department says this is how much money we need, and then the Federal Reserve will credit the Treasury Department with that amount of money. Now, like if it's not tax money, then they're basically selling these Treasury bonds instead of raising tax revenue. And this is an important distinction because when you hear a lot of um, reasons, a lot of racists or white supremacists don't want to pay for reparations, or like, well, I'll have to pay taxes and da 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 da, and I didn't have any slaves and all these ridiculous reasons, right? Um, the the interesting thing when we look at this from a financial point of view is the most likely source and the best probable source is by selling bonds, not through raising tax revenue. Um, Even though between the $6 million or the 16 million, it would be $1 to $3 trillion a year over 75 years, or even if it's a little bit more, that tax revenue of 4.1 trillion is not going to cover all of that because there's other government services that are paid for with that 4.1 trillion, right? So what we can do, which they did with COVID, they did in 2008 as well in the housing and financial crisis, we can actually fund this through treasury bonds, and it won't raise taxes, and it won't kind of cause any like it will defeat the argument of like, oh well, I'll have to pay taxes because of this. um, and it also connects to this argument that reparations should be paid by the government. Essentially, the government will be paying back the interest on these treasury bonds, uh, and that's kind of like the debt they have to pay for having not made us whole, essentially. And I mentioned the Compensated Emancipation Act in DC in 1862. The British also did a similar Compensated Emancipation Act where they paid slave owners and not the people who were emancipated. And they did that. The amount of money that they had to pay for that was 40% of their budget at the time. And it took them about 180 years to pay it off. So, whether we're paying this over 75 years or doing it prorated, where like 75 years would be the max if you were like just born, you know what I mean? Um, like if it has to take that long, so be it. If it took 180 years for them to pay off their debt to slave owners, right? Um, so I think we have a really strong kind of not only financial argument, but argument that's politically feasible that can get passed. Now, the other thing I want to share is this second video, and then I'll get into kind of like the national debt and stuff like that. So basically, the key takeaway from that is how we can actually manage a bill like this. You know, if we did 6 million at one time, 16 million at one time for everybody, it would be more than $250 trillion, right? This would be a bill that, you know, they wouldn't even look at type of thing, and it would be virtually impossible to get done. Um, but if we are able to break it down for lifetime payments over 75 years, or even prorated where people get it based on their current age, it would make it possible to get this done politically. And we can actually do it by not raising again taxes, but just selling government treasury bonds to the open market as well as the Federal Reserve, which is, again, how most things that get paid for that are like trillions of dollars. Um, and, you know, it would actually, um, like if you presented a bill that had this type of framework, this would be something that politicians would actually consider and, you know, appreciate. And that's why next I'm going to get into like the debt ceiling and the debt limit. Um, but basically, the important part is just how do we make this actually something we can get done, right? So check this out. The national debt is basically $30 trillion, and the debt limit is about $31.4 trillion. So what this means is Congress has the power to increase the debt limit and to appropriate money. So what happens is whenever they spend so much money that they reach the debt limit, they have to vote to increase the debt limit so that they can borrow more money, right? So when you're able to like get a bill down to $1 to $3 trillion or about that range, you can get things done because it either wouldn't require raising the debt limit, excuse me, and if it does, um, you know, it's within the acceptable range in which the debt limit is typically increased, anyways. And so this is something that's extremely feasible. Whereas if you tried to make a reparations program based solely on tax income, you would have people up in arms, even if it's justified, right? That we are owed. There's different ways of funding it so that it gets done politically in a way where really, if you think about it, it'll be the richest people and the federal government actually paying the bill, right? The Federal Reserve, the bank of the government, and, you know, rich people in the private sector and public institutions and other foreign entities that want to buy treasury bonds. And they can't participate in the bond market by saying, "Oh, I don't want to pay for reparations." No, if you buy any bond, you're funding the government. So you can't say, "Oh, I only want to pay for Social Security bonds," or "I only want to pay for reparation bonds." No, any treasury bonds you have to pay for, and those bonds fund the government, right? So they can't be racist, ironically, because they enjoy participating in the bond market, and none of them are going to like say, "Oh, well, we'll never participate in the bond market." And even if like a large portion of them do, the Federal Reserve is the main source of money, and they spend trillions of dollars on bonds. And they are, you know, kind of books right now are in the trillions in terms of like what type of balance sheet they have. Um, so I kind of just wanted to add this in terms of this context. This is the most recent congressional report. Um, so the up-to-date numbers are from November 22. The federal debt totaled 31.3 trillion, and the current debt limit is 31.4 trillion, which means there's only 200, or actually $100 billion that the government can spend outside of raising taxes right now. And that 100 billion is not going to be enough really to fund the government this year, which means that they already approved the appropriations bill, the omnibus bill of $1.7 trillion, right? That's going to last the government till September. So they're going to have to increase the debt limit in order to even pay for that bill of $1.7 trillion for over these next few months until September, because there's only $100 billion that they can spend, right? So they need what? Basically $1.6 trillion, right? They're going to have to raise the debt limit at least by $1.6 trillion to even pay for what's going to happen over this next year. So, this is where kind of politics and kind of like political economics comes in, and we need to be very thoughtful about how we can make this palatable and make it kind of something that they're like, okay, yeah, that makes sense. Not only do we know that we have to pay it because it's a debt that's owed, but actually this would be politically feasible, meaning that there would be enough people in Congress to get the votes. You need 218 people in the House of Representatives out of 435, and then you need 51 in the Senate, and then obviously the president's signature. And if the president decides to veto it, then you need 2/3 of Congress, right? So you need 67 in the Senate, and what would be the calculation for, let's see, 60, it was 2/3. So 290 in the House, right? That would get over the president's veto. So basically, this is how we can actually get reparations done and make it achievable economically, and it would make sure that people are actually paid in such a way that like if you tried to do the 75-year lifetime payments for everybody as a standard, then you will at least probably have 2 generations. If someone dies early, that money will be passed on to the next generation, and essentially that would probably take another 75 years at most, right, to get paid off, right? So at most it would be like something between like 150 years to 75 years, depending on like how things go. And then the other thing to look at is, like I said, doing the prorated, which it will be a little bit harder to pass, but the point is it's still possible. It's still within the ballpark. It's basically in 1 year, it's about the amount of money that COVID cost. And then after that, it drops down to like more reasonable numbers, like 1 to 5 trillion, depending on like where things, which year, and it gets cheaper over time because people will have their lifetime payments, and each year it will be less and less that it costs. So all of this is totally achievable. I'm kind of curious what your thoughts are and any feedback y'all may have. And if any of y'all want to come up and give your age and see what your payouts or someone you care about's payouts would be, feel free to.
Hey Eric, I don't have too much to add, but I just want to say thank you for doing this work.
Definitely.
I just love how you broke it down and made it digestible and make it feasible. Because you always hear how we don't have or we can't what we can't do, and all these other talking points that usually come up when we dealing with reparations. And thank you for doing this work, man.
Thank you, man. I appreciate that. Yeah, it's super important, and we not only have to have the calculations in terms of what we're owed, but we also got to think about, okay, how much is this going to cost a year? How much is this going to cost to pay out the total bill? Like when I talked to Darity, his current formula, he uses the racial wealth gap to calculate how much we're owed, and that's around like $17 trillion, $17.5 trillion in 2023 dollars. If you did that a year, that would be around $300K per person per freedman, right? And that would be his idea of paying out would be for 10 years, right? So like 10 years, 300K. Oh, sorry. Let me correct that. Actually, it would be 300, basically 30K a year for 10 years, and then in total it would be about 300K that you're getting paid. And that's feasible. It would basically be around a few trillion dollars a year. Like let's see, 17.5, like 7 point. What? Actually, let me just do it. 17. Yeah, $1.75 trillion a year for that plan, right? That's feasible and it's doable. Um, the only thing that we are looking at is that only includes, because we came to this conclusion that the amount that he's calculated for the racial wealth gap is basically equivalent to the 40 acres in a meal calculation. So they're virtually identical, but that doesn't account for the 1.36 trillion from the Freedmen Bank that was stolen even after the 40 acres were taken away. And it doesn't include the value of our ancestors' labor and skills, which the definition of reparation includes basically paying back money you didn't pay for labor and skills, and even the potential of lost earnings. So not just what you weren't paid, but what you could have been paid if you could do something else. So that again would bring us to 6 million at the minimum and 16 million per person if we used the Compensated Emancipation Act, right? And again, this is in the context of knowing that 1-to-3 ratio for the Compensated Emancipation Act means that a slave owner got paid $45 million in today's money, right? So that's why I'm like, not only shouldn't we accept less, we're owed more. And if you kind of think about, all the different parts to what we're owed, the fact that the 6 million is even less than the Compensated Emancipation Act is crazy, right? Because you're literally adding 246 trillion plus the 40 acres plus the Freedmen Bank, and all of that total divided by 42 million freedmen is still less than the price that was paid for compensated emancipation to slave owners of all people. So I mean, the arguments are kind of clear. Like the UN would qualifies victims as not only the people who suffered harm, but their descendants. So we qualify for everything that they were owed that they didn't get as well. And then if we also look at this in the context of genocide, genocide summarizes everything from slavery till now. We've experienced different degrees of genocide, but it's been genocide nonetheless by every definition that the UN and the US defines genocide by. And we can actually prove that mathematically. And the crime for genocide in the US is $1 million per kind of harm. So if you think about the $6 million figure, that's like 6 harms per freedman on average. The 16 million would be like 16 harms per freedman on average. And then, like Darity's calculation of like 300,000 or so is not yet at that 1 million level of like genocide. So it's basically saying we didn't experience genocide. And if you look at even what the Iranians who were held hostage were paid, they were each paid about $4 million each based on how much it was calculated based on how much time they were basically held hostage. They said, like, what was your missing opportunity of like what you would have earned in that time, essentially. And they calculated it would be $4 million per person that was held hostage, right? So for them to be paid $4 million in that day's money, which if you run at 7% interest is going to be even more today. The point is, there's no way we should accept less than genocide, less than what we're owed for the 40 acres, for the Freedmen Bank, and for the value of our ancestors' labor and skills. And even if you say we're not owed any of that, the Compensated Emancipation Act, where they paid slave owners the modern day equivalent of $45 million each, which would be 16 million essentially per freedman, is kind of, it's a shame that that money should have been given to the freedman, not the slave owner, right? And that money would be the equivalent of what it would be today at 16 million, right? So there's really strong arguments for what we're owed and also how we can pay for it and get it passed politically. Sean R, did you want to add something? Or Renee, Sean Renee.
I want to thank you
Of
as
course.
you put this together and breaking down all the numbers. So it's very helpful.
Thank you.
I also wanted to ask a question about the bonds,
Yeah.
because I just wanted to know: is the Fed selling these treasury bonds like all the time, or is when they just need extra cash? When is that done?
So actually, it's not the Fed that sells the bonds. It's the Fed buys them from the Treasury Department. So whenever there's, like I showed, like there's about 4.1 trillion in like tax revenue. Whenever spending gets more than tax revenue, they have to borrow the money by selling bonds. And that's the Treasury Department. The Treasury Department sells bonds either to private entities, public entities, foreign entities, or to the Federal Reserve. And in the case of 2008 and 2020 with COVID, it was the Federal Reserve. And like you heard in the video, they said they were willing to buy an unlimited amount of treasury bonds. That was the Fed saying that. And all the Fed has to do is print or type in a computer how much money they want to credit the Treasury Department with in exchange for those treasury bonds.
Okay, thank you for clearing that up for me. I
Yeah, of
appreciate
course.
that.
Yeah, to me, what's important about this is like we literally get to see the pipework of how money flows in the government. And the reason that's important is then we can kind of calibrate our kind of like demands to how the pipeworks are formed and understand like, okay, here's where the money goes. Mostly what we're going to ask for is going to be more than all the tax revenue that can be collected in a year. And even if they gave all 4.1 trillion to reparations, you know what I mean? Like it would still basically not fund the whole bill, right? And so they're going to need to borrow money by selling treasury bonds, right? But that the benefit in that is that taxes don't need to be raised for the everyday person, right? And then not only that, the Federal Reserve, the government's bank, can just type in a computer how much they're going to give the government to then buy the treasury bonds. Basically, they credit the Treasury Department with the amount of money that they're going to buy the bonds for in exchange. So that is the inner workings, the inner plumbing of like money in our government right now. If it doesn't come from tax revenue, then it has to come from borrowing money by selling treasury bonds. And that is literally the kind of two ways spending and how the government operates. And
Do you have any of this information? I'm sorry to cut you off.
no, you're good.
Do you have any of this information anywhere?
Not
Website or something?
not centrally, but on our website we have all the calculations for reparations and things like that. If you go to freedmen.party/policy, actually I'll put it in the jumbotron. You can see the calculations and how we came up with the numbers. But I do want to add a part where we, essentially talk about this, you know what I mean? And bring up this conversation of not only how we're going to pay for it, but then what would be the annual bill that the government would have to foot, you know what I mean? And excuse me, the cool part about this is it really makes our argument even harder to combat, because they can't say, oh well, we can't afford this or this isn't possible. like we know it's possible. We know we can do this. So it's only a matter of like one of our goals this year is to like write a reparations bill that includes either an 75-year payout, lifetime payment based on our average life expectancy for freedmen, or to kind of do it where we can do the prorated version. That's my ideal, where it's based on your age, because if you're already 75, you know what I mean, like you've already reached the life expectancy. Or if you're 74, you're a year away, so you should get all of your money at once rather than waiting another 75 years that you may not survive, right? And there is a mechanism that actually we're borrowing from the Freedmen Bank Charter. Essentially, they had this really cool part that we can upgrade where it said, basically if someone who created a Freedmen Bank account passes away, that money will go to whoever they willed it to, or it'll go to their next of kin. And if there's no next of kin, then they would put that money back into the fund. And in our version, it would be that money goes back into the reparation fund to be divided equally amongst the freedmen if there's no one that they've left. And so that ensures that there's no amount of genocide that they can perform to limit the amount of debt that they have to pay. They'll always have to pay the total amount that's owed. They can't just like try to kill us off to reduce the debt. That's kind of the purpose. So in our case, like whether you do it 75 years or you do it prorated based on your age, if there's an unexpected passing, that money will go based on that person's will to the next of kin, and if there's no next of kin, to be divided amongst the freedmen equally. And so it ensures essentially that they can't skirt their responsibilities. How you doing, Marcel? We're just talking about how we can afford to pay for reparations, and just to recap, the main kind of takeaways are the total tax revenue of the United States is around $4.1 trillion. So if we want to make a reparations program that's feasible, it'll most likely come through the selling of bonds rather than through the selling of, or rather than the raising of taxes. And the key insight about this is in 2008, during the financial crisis, that's how things were funded on the $1 trillion level. And in 2020, that's how things were funded during COVID. It was the selling of bonds, not the raising of taxes. And so what we can do is essentially, instead of raising taxes and defeating that argument of like all the white supremacists saying they don't want to pay for reparations because they'll have to pay in taxes, is actually will be the selling of bonds. So that kind of defeats that argument. And then the other thing that we talked about is how to either do lifetime payments. The average life expectancy that the CDC found is for freedmen is about 75 years compared to the 79-year average for everybody in the United States. So if we say 75 years is the average lifetime expectancy for freedmen, we could do the 6 million or 16 million lifetime payments over that 75 years. Or if we want to be more ambitious, we can prorate it based on your current age. And I showed like a cool program where you could put in your age and like figure out what your lifetime payments would be. Like basically, I'm 28, so my lifetime payments would be for over 47 years, and it would be $127K a year at $6 million, or over 47 years, $340K at $16 million. And for someone like Darity, who's 69 years old, it would be $1 million a year for 6 years at $6 million, or $2.6 million over 6 years at $16 million. Marcel, how you doing, bro? Go for it.
I'm doing good, Eric. How are you?
I'm doing great. Glad to have you in here.
Thank you. Glad to be here. So yeah, I'm glad you already kind of called it out. Reparations does not come from tax revenue.
Exactly.
Anyone say that is complete BS.
Yep.
Okay, reparation has never in modern history come from tax revenue. It's always been the government using its ability as a monetary sovereign, where the American government can generate the revenue they need in order to pay the financial responsibilities that they have. And you mentioned my plan calls for the same thing. My plan calls for us to be paid in U.S. Treasury bonds about $3 million per person, and we get paid interest on those U.S. bonds that we have. Anyone knows a bond is the best investment, the most secure investment that a person can have. The U.S. government does not have a history of defaulting on their bonds, ever. And really, they can't. It's impossible for the U.S. government to default on their bonds unless they just decide not to, and they never have before. So we will have lifetime payments in perpetuity because we'll be getting paid on the interest of the U.S. Treasury bonds. So we can definitely fund reparations. Something else I want to acknowledge, once we get our reparations, we will see our life expectancy increase because for Black men, it's been dropping. So it's dropped the most of all groups. If a Black woman, it's dropped the most among women. But once we get our reparations, our life expectancy is sure to increase, is sure to go up.
Yeah, and actually, just to add to that, you're totally right. When you break down our average life expectancy by gender, it's like 76 for freedmen women and like 72 for freedmen men. So, that is a real factor in terms of how this could be thought about. So I appreciate you sharing that. And I actually think that's a creative idea of adding the idea of like those interest payments where we could get paid off the interest as well. I think that's very creative. Shauna R., did you want to add something?
Yeah, I find it interesting. I remember being in a space, this was actually a couple months back, and it was a space with some conservatives. It was mixed, it was Black and white. But there was, Marcel was on the stage, and there were a couple other people speaking about how, we can pay for reparations.
Can't hear you.
Oh, yeah. Can you hear me now? Let me move closer.
Yeah, I can hear her.
Okay, I'm gonna just continue.
Yeah, keep going. I can hear you.
But there was this guy named Ross, and I forget his last name. But every single thing that we came, because he was a financial.
Oh, I remember that. I remember that.
Yes. Remember? So he was in the room to listen to us because the question was, okay, how do we fund reparations? And there were plenty of people who came on stage and they said exactly what Marcel said. They said exactly what you said. But for some reason, this guy kept saying, no, we can't do that. No, that's impossible. No. And it was like, no, he just wanted, I guess he wanted us to feel like we just didn't know what we were talking about. Mm-hmm. And so I'm so glad that you have these numbers, and I'm so glad that you have that video, because that video gives a visual of, how all of that works. But even in explaining that to people who do know that's exactly how we can fund reparations, they push back. And I just kind of want to know what our strategy can be to actually, continue pushing it out there that, yes, this can happen and this is how it can happen.
Yeah, so I'll say one thing real quick and I'll pass it to Marcel. Once we have the answer and we can actually prove it to ourselves, not only like politically but also mathematically, and looking at how the government works and what's the annual increases, we can look at, like I said, the debt ceiling and the debt limit, or the national debt and the debt limit. Once we understand those mechanics and someone still says no, then we know it's not about whether it's feasible. We know it's more of a personal opinion. It's not anything grounded in reality. And you will, no matter what, still have detractors. You can make the most perfect mathematical formula in the world, and you're going to have someone that could detract from it, even if it's scientifically and mathematically true. So in that case, you kind of just keep keep it moving. You know, educate and share the knowledge with as many people as you can. But when you reach people that are just unwilling to even accept the reality and accept that truth, then you know that they really have no real problem with how it would work. It's more they don't want to pay for reparations at all. And they're merely trying to conceal it with ignorance. So that's what I would say. Marcel, go for it.
Yeah, I was going to say, you do the same thing you do with a lot of bad faith arguments. You just eventually ignore it. I mean, some people want to make bad faith arguments because they just anti-Black American bigots. The fact of the matter is, reparations is not anything new to this nation. This nation's done reparations many times before. And no one's ever asked how you're going to pay for it. They find a way to pay for it. This is not something that's happened before only. It's something that's happening right now. Our country is paying reparations right now. People who are loved ones of 9/11 victims, they get reparations. People who are exposed to radiation, they're getting reparations. People in Guam just got reparations. Okay? They're trying to, people, Holocaust survivors, getting reparations. The American tribal government getting reparations. Okay, so this is not stuff we got to go to the drawing board. This has already been drawn. This has already been sketched out. And I think I remember that space. I don't know if I was in there, but I've been in Christian spaces where all these white guys, I mean, it's usually white guys, who always say that they're economists, and I'm going head to head with them. In fact, Dee Tubman has a few of the conferences I've had with them on her page, and I shut them down. They finally just had to admit, okay, I'm an anti-Black bigot. It finally just came out. Now, some people wanted to see, in fact, I recorded this clip. One lady was like, wow, if everyone talked about reparations, Marcel, the way you did, I think everyone would be in support of reparations because, some people are indeed really just fiscal conservatives. Not all white people who say they're fiscally conservative or ask, what about that? Not all of them are anti-Black bigots. Some of them are generally fiscally conservative. Like, you do have some Republicans usually who really do believe in not spending much, cutting back on debt. I don't agree with that, but there's some people who are genuine. So I don't want to put everybody in the box. But those people who are genuine, usually when we come with facts about the government not running out of money, about the American government handles debt all the time. Like right now, the American government is pumping trillions of dollars in debt because of PPP loans. When you really go through with people who are genuine and making good faith arguments, you will realize that there is no reason why America cannot not pay reparations. So, Sean, I want to lose these people who want to be bad faith arguments. Just consider them anti-Black American bigots who don't feel we deserve anything, while at the same time they probably done inherited houses and cars and stocks and bonds, and probably done got financial gifts from their parents, and at the same time telling us that we shouldn't worry about our inheritance. Just ignore them.
Facts. No, that was great, Marcel. Yeah, I agree 100%. You want to go for it, Sean?
No, I'm going to take his advice. I'm going to take his advice and ignore it. But yeah, I will still keep pushing, and I'm not going to change my position on how this reparations can get funded.
Definitely. And one of the things I learned in terms of like how a lot of these people try to argue, there's straw man arguments and there's steel man arguments. Straw man arguments would be like, well, I don't want to pay taxes. It's going to raise my taxes. Steel man argument is what we did in this space today. When we went through how the government works, how funding goes from Congress to the Treasury Department, and if there's not enough tax revenue to pay for it, how they sell Treasury bonds to either the open market or to the Federal Reserve, which all the Fed does is type in a number in the keyboard and credit the Treasury Department in exchange for those bonds, right? And so once you look through all of that, and we can clearly understand this is feasible, there's no real argument. So that's steel manning, when you really steel man the counter argument and you say, I'm going to make all the detractors. I'm going to go through all of their complaints. I'm going to go through every physical and whatever technical mechanisms of how reparations will be paid and how it can be paid. And if I can still man the argument and still win, then they're done, right? And that's how we have to look at this. We still man the argument and we defeated it. So now it's kind of complete. There's nothing really they can do but, get down or lay down, right? So, we're on the right path. Brandon, and then we'll go to Always.
You know what? I just forgot my question. I was going to ask Marcel something, but I kind of forgot my question. So
no worries. No worries. Think about it. We'll come back to you. Always. How about you?
Thank you to the host, to the co-host, to the room. I appreciate it. I'm just getting back 2023. I hope all is well with everybody. This is American, but now it's always American. Only reason why I took the mic is because you threw it to me, and I just didn't want to get kicked out the room. You know how that goes. So I just took the mic, and I don't speak in the rooms anymore. I just listen. And
nah, you're good. Don't worry about getting kicked out. But how about we do this for fun? Always. So I wrote a program where you can kind of put in your age, and it'll give you like your lifetime payments and your annual payout. So like, if you don't want to give me age, that's okay. You can give me a made up age, and we could put that.
No, I don't mind giving my age. I just turned 38 December 31st. So
congratulations. Okay,
here, so thank you.
That's awesome. So for you, if we did lifetime payments and prorated it based on your age, you would get payouts for 37 years. And if it was $6 million in reparation, it'd be $162K a year. If it was $16 million, it'd be $432K a year for 37 years.
Wow. Okay, so where am I supposed to pick this up at?
So we're gonna resurrect the Freedmen's Bureau and the Freedmen Bank. And the way I think it will work ideally is you go to the Freedmen Bureau, prove that you're a freedman, and then you can go to the Freedmen Bank and open up a bank account and start getting your payouts.
Okay, that is a deal. I want to also say hello to Marcel as well. I see him up on stage, so it's good to see you guys again or hear from you guys again. It's been a minute, but again, I'm going to go ahead and step down. I don't have any words at all. I just want to listen.
No, you're good. Thank you for coming up. And you don't gotta be scared in our spaces. We're pretty chill. But I try to send the mic out. No. I try to invite everybody, give everybody at least a chance. You know what I mean?
No, I respect that. No, but this is just with me and what happened last year. There's a lot of stuff going on, and if I can have any advice for anybody on here, mental health. This stuff right here will drive you crazy. It's okay. It's okay to step out.
Yeah, definitely. You gotta protect your peace.
You better because
always. That is so true. You have to protect.
This is American. This is American. Marcel, call me American. I just put always in front.
But definitely, it's so true. And let me tell you, if you can't compartmentalize social media, then yes, it's very good to step away from it. Like me, I can compartmentalize social media. Some people take it way more seriously than me. I don't. Whatever people say about me on here really bounces off of me. It really gets echoed. But if your person can't, they really do need to step off and protect them and tell people be writing me, "Oh, Marcel, are you okay?" I'm like, "Yeah, well, yeah, people, I'm okay." Because I don't be taking that serious. People do, and I say they do need to protect themselves.
Right. Well, I'm gonna leave you guys with this, and then I'm jumping down. Have no more words after that. My grandmother told me before she left many times, and I guess I didn't believe it until she finally left. Now I can understand it. She said, "I'll be dead and gone, and y'all still be running around here feeling good, kicking it, fucking, excuse me for the words." You know, she didn't say that part, but I'm going to add that in there. Drinking, kicking it, doing what you do, running at the men, women, or whatever you're going to do, going to work or so on and so on. But then she said, y'all should try to keep me around here long as y'all can. You know, and with that being said, I understand that you say you know how to balance this stuff out. sometimes we can all get overwhelmed with this stuff. It's a lot. We already going through what we've been through for generations. On top of this stuff with us right now. I never thought that I experienced what I experienced, and not blaming no fingers or pointing, and I'm not going to go into all that because that's for the birds. But I say, even if you can balance this stuff out, take time for yourself. Self-care is best. My grandmother, last thing, and I'm done. She said, I should have put me first. I should have put me first. So she took care of everybody else and put herself last. She had 2 sick sons, her daughters, helping out my mother and her kids, all this stuff, and nephews, nieces, everybody depended on her. And with that being said, as I drop down, I love me. Well, hold on, let me say this better. I'm learning how to love me. Thank you.
Yes, I love that. Yeah, you definitely. One lesson I learned is, you can only help others as much as you help yourself. And one of the things I shared, earlier this year is, make sure you get your dreaming in. Try to get like 8 hours of dream time. Drink your water. Pray, meditate, exercise. Try to do the basics. Eat healthy. Because the better you are, the better you'll be to help others and to kind of share your superpowers with others and help them with their lives. So, make sure you definitely take time for self-care. Talent, you got your hand up, go for it.
Peace and love to the space. Shout out to the host and co-host. Freedom Polly, man, I was on your website not too long ago, man. There's so much great information. I had to make sure I shouted you out on the platform because it really lays out a lot of information, graphs, details. So this new feature that you just mentioned where you can type in information and calculate, that's fire. That's definitely fire. And it continues the integrity that is needed for us to really kind of figure out how to wrap our heads around strategy and the best approach that was all owed to us. My question is, you guys have been shutting down all these tax positions and people talking about it raising taxes. I wasn't in here to know if you guys went over the inflation part of it, because I know that's something that's also been brought up, or inflation. And though we are in a moment right now with inflation, we go into the supermarket, we're seeing how that $100 don't hit the way, the $200 doesn't hit the way it used to hit when it comes to filling up these carts. Do you guys have any projections on what the inflation would look like? And if we're talking about reparations being something that happens over a long period of time, is there a long period of time that matches that in inflation? Have you guys kind of thought about that projection, or have you spoken that or have any information about that? What would that look like so we could argue against it when people talk about inflation and how this is going to affect them on the short and or long term?
Yes, definitely, bro. Great questions. So yeah, we did talk about it a little bit earlier, but I'll recap it and kind of give an overview. So there's a few things to consider when you're thinking about how to pay for reparations. I said earlier we've done the calculations of what we're owed, right? At the low end is $6 million per freedman that we've calculated based on the 40 acres, the Freedmen Bank, and the value of our ancestors' labor and skills. And then on the high end, it would be based on the Compensated Emancipation Act at $16 million per freedman, right? So when you break that down over the average life expectancy of a freedman, which is around 75 years, that would be an annual cost of $1 trillion if you're doing $6 million per freedman, or $3 trillion if you're doing 16 million per freedman, right? Those are within the bounds of not only the cost, or not only within how much money is raised in taxes, 4.1 trillion, but even if we need to borrow money by selling treasury bonds, it's still politically feasible. And the reason it's politically feasible is not only is it within an acceptable debt limit and need to raise the debt ceiling, but it's also inflation protected, meaning we could do it in such a way it wouldn't trigger inflation. And then even when we did the maximum cost calculations for doing reparations prorated, whereas instead of over 75 years, it'll be based on how old you are. Then even the highest calculations for that are within an acceptable range if we're able to understand that payments will even decrease over time once the initial payment for anyone 75 years or 74 years or older is paid. So the questions about inflation, one of the videos talks about good inflation is typically around 2%. 20% is when you start to hit like bad numbers of inflation, and we're within that acceptable range of like 2% of inflation, if at all. So definitely a great question. Marcel, did you want to add, and then we'll go to True? You there, Marcel? If not, we'll go to True and then come back to Marcel. True, you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yep, can hear you.
Hello to the room. Hello to myself. I just got a quick question to ask. Like, I'm not a problem with Marcel. I love Marcel. But Marcel, I gotta ask you a question, and I'm gonna be honest about this. And I don't give a fuck what room I am and whatever that I do. I just gotta ask this. When I was growing up as a child, Italians really never got along with us. I grew up in an Italian neighborhood. The dude that y'all dealt with, what is his name? Naeem? He's not even a Black American. So when we talking about reparations, the only thing I wonder is why so many people got an opinion about how we move and we got to insert them into our business. I think that's the one thing that worries the hell out of me. Like, we really don't need them. Like, if you Panamanian and you are Italian, what do we need you for reparations? Y'all didn't go through the shit that we went through. So I don't think it's not even a deal that we can talk to. It's a couple of people that's in Chicago right now that we talk to on a daily basis that's on this little internet, on this little whatever this is. And they are actually from Chicago. I think that we should have reached out to them before we start adding other people into their conversation. And I grew up around Italians. Ain't no way in the world wasn't no Italian. Never on our side. So that's the shit that worries me. That's all I wanted to say.
Well, yeah. In general, I'll say that the BTP organization is a separate thing from the Freedmen Party. So I can't really cape for someone that, I haven't really worked that deeply with. But what I can say is that the work is the real thing that matters. Don't let anyone else distract you from what we need to get accomplished. Yesterday, we had a space where I showed ChatGPT, which is a new AI technology that you can converse with, and it's virtually it's almost good enough to fool most people to think it's like a human being if you didn't know, right? And so the point I'm making by saying that, and there's also I showed another technology that an AI can generate photorealistic faces of people that don't even exist. So you combine photorealistic profile pictures with something like ChatGPT, you can spend all your time on Twitter arguing with things that don't exist. So unless you're building with someone, actually creating something together that's worthwhile, do not spend your time on Twitter, arguing with people and going back and forth. And, actually one of the ironies and a joke I made is before Elon bought Twitter, he was complaining about how many bots are on Twitter. And then the joke is that then he started running his life by running Twitter polls. And that didn't hit it didn't crash into a wall until he realized when he put up that poll of should he be CEO or not. And then everyone voted to fire him, that he realized, oh, maybe I should not let all these things that I thought were bots decide who is going to be the CEO of Twitter, right? So the point I'm trying to make is please do not spend any time. If you don't know the person, if you aren't creating anything with them of value, don't spend your time arguing with people on Twitter. Focus on the work, focus on building. The most important thing we can be doing right now is tracing our lineage, getting ready for being even eligible for reparations if you haven't done that work. We actually have a Trace Your Lineage challenge starting in Black History Month, so you can get prepared for it. All you got to do is share a story about your lineage and how you found out who you are, and then use that hashtag so people can kind of all see like the collage of our pathways, how we got to where we are today. And then besides that, we need to work on resurrecting the Freedmen's Bureau, resurrecting the Freedmen's Bank, getting reparations bills passed, and now knowing that the Congress is split, like the only way it will happen over the next 2 years is through executive order. So we need to be working on that. Then you have genocide prevention. Instead of doing whack-a-mole with mass incarceration, police killings, hate crimes, and homelessness and this and that, we focus on genocide as the silver bullet that covers all of the acts against us. Like, these are the things we need to be focusing on. There's so much work on our to-do list that there should not be any time to be arguing with anyone about what needs to be done. And I made another tweet earlier that was something like, Steve Jobs had a quote is like, you don't change your target in the middle of a bomb run, right? And I kind of flipped it for us where it said, and you don't argue about reparations in the middle of a genocide, right? Like, we're literally experiencing genocide right now, and we need reparations that are owed for over 150 years ago, for 400 years of genocide. Like, there is no time for us to be arguing in the foxhole about what we need to do. We need to be focusing on the goal and putting in the work. Marcel, go for it.
Yeah, I had received a phone call, but I want to respond to Talent's question about inflation. That's another tied and hired out argument they try to use against us getting reparations and inflation. First of all, let's talk about inflation. People often think inflation means having too much money in the economy. There is actually another cause of inflation that happens more often in the American economy, and that's actually a scarcity of resources. Okay? Inflation is usually not a problem if there's enough resources to buy. Inflation usually happens when there's not enough resources, and that resource is so scarce, the price skyrockets high. And actually, in America, a lot of times inflation has been linked to lack of regulation of things such as price gouging. A lot of, even some Republicans will say that some of these companies receive, billions of dollars from Biden, and yet they're just running wild with prices sky high. So sometimes what we call inflation is not even inflation, but the truth of the matter is, inflation is when you have to make sure that there's not a scarcity of resources and everyone's trying to consume a limited resource at the same time. But if that's not a problem, then inflation really doesn't exist. Now, hyperinflation can happen when there's more currency in the economy than what the economy can sustain. My plan that I have deals with that by having us getting paid in U.S. bonds, which pays us on interest. So that way, we don't get our money in a lump sum. I know that may not be popular with some, but that's the only way I can think of about fighting hyperinflation. We get our money in perpetuity as we live through the rest of our lives. So instead of the economy having to add because my plan is we get paid $70 trillion. And instead of us having to add $70 trillion to the economy in 1 year, we just do it over an amount of time, and we add, according to my plan, like an additional $4-6 trillion per year. And that way, there's no hyperinflation, and we are still getting our check. And as far as what we should be doing right now, there's one thing you left out there. We should be planning to run for office. We should be preparing to run for office. Okay? Right now, because I ran for office, people are taking a lot more seriously now. That's why I was able to be part of the historic reparations workshop that happened here in South Carolina. The first time a political party has sponsored a reparations event in South Carolina since the days of Reconstruction. It's the reason why a state representative is saying he wants to bring me to the state house to talk about bringing an office of Freedmen Affairs to South Carolina. You know what that's special? South Carolina was the first state to have a Freedmen's Bureau field office. The first state. South Carolina was the first state where the Emancipation Proclamation was read. The first state to have a Freedmen town. First state to have a Freedmen bank. First state to have a Freedmen school. If any state needs to be at the head of the tip of the spear in South Carolina. So I'm trying to open up an office of Freedmen Affairs right now as we speak. And I'm trying to do a commission on reparations in South Carolina. I don't believe in state reparations, but we do need to know what damage was done and what numbers are owed. All that data helps. A commission on reparations will also help us to disaggregate ourselves. We're not just black. We are freemen, black Americans who are citizens of American slaves, freemen. I'm working with congressmen to do all of that. But imagine if I was in office already. Imagine if everyone in this space was in office and y'all were the people I was having to work with. It would be done already. We need to run for office. It pisses me off to no end how I hear some people whining and crying about me endorsing Gabriel Piemonte, which I still damn do. It irritates the hell out of me. You're whining about me endorsing a white guy who has lineage-based policies and reparations, but we are sitting on our ass not running for office. If you want me to endorse a black piece of black policy, then you get up off your ass and you be that black piece of black policy. Until then, I'm going to move and endorse what the hell I want to endorse. If they have policies for us, I will make no apologies for it. There is nothing that can be done to stop me.
Hey, Marcel, I don't know how I could even forget to mention that. You made a great point. We need to run for office. The way we think about this is vote or run. Vote or run. If you're not voting for someone that you feel like would represent you properly, that means you are the most qualified to be running, right? And instead of us making excuses for ourselves, let's replace the people in office. We often talk about the government as this abstract thing. The government is made of people, 435 in the House, 100 in the Senate. They decide what legislation gets passed. You need 270 electoral votes to get a president in office. These are numbers that if we understand and can master, we can win the game. We have not only multiple states that are black majorities, we have multiple districts that are black majorities. In fact, out of the Congressional Black Caucus, there's about 58 members. And even looking at the data for their districts based on the demographics, most of them are not even in black majority districts. And there's about at least 8 districts that are black majorities that we do not have anyone in Congress. And then there's districts where there's more blacks than whites that we could have people in office as well. And so once we understand, there's so much opportunity for us to actually win and be the ones that determine what happens in this country. You need freedmen voters. Those freedmen voters elect freedmen candidates, and the freedmen candidates are the one that vote on the freedmen agenda. You know, you have to understand that this is a step-by-step process, and every part needs to be in synchrony, right? You have literally all of it is determined by votes. The voters, the freedmen voters electing candidates, and then those candidates in elected office then voting on the policy that will happen. That's how the entire government works. And once we accept that reality, all we have to do is get the numbers in the right places to win. And it's feasible. It's possible. We had 2,000 freedmen in elected office during Reconstruction. This is years right after slavery, right? 2,000 freedmen in elected office, 80% voter turnout. Right now, we're around 60% voter turnout, and we don't have nearly 2,000 freedmen on code at the local, national, and state level. So if we can get back to those levels, and I like to also bring up the example of Wilmington, North Carolina. The white supremacists were so angry that freedmen had actually voted in record numbers despite the threat of death, despite all of their fears or whatever. They voted at such high levels that they took over the government legally by voting people into office. They pissed off the white supremacists so much that they had a massacre, a genocide of the people in Wilmington that were elected. That's the level of work we need to do, so that they are so angry that we're doing what they're most afraid of, that their only defense could be doing something violent. And now we have the ability to defend ourselves. This is not 1865 anymore.
Yeah, I was just about to say, let them try it now. That's why we need to be well armed, well formed, and to the best of our ability, well trained. Let them try it now. And they did that stuff when our people were scattered, well, not scattered about, but there was no social media. Our people in the next city over didn't even know what was going on. Some people now don't even know about what happened in Wilmington. But the point of the matter is, y'all, that Eric is making, is after Reconstruction, a lot of our people were still functionally illiterate. South Carolina, again, the first state to elect a black person to the U.S. Congress. His name was Joseph Rainey. They didn't know Robert Smalls. South Carolina, again. South Carolina, Louisiana, Mississippi. South Carolina is the only state in America with the history of a majority black state legislator. The only state that's ever had a majority non-white state legislator. We can do it again. If our ancestors didn't coming out of slavery, we can do it now. And with all this smoke that some of the claim we have, we should be taking that smoke to the ballot and running.
Yes, exactly, to the ballot.
Can I ask you an honest question? Because I just want to ask one honest question. Marcel, is it okay with you?
Yeah, go for it, and then we'll get to the other hands, because we got some other people.
Don't be mad at me. Do not be mad at me. Be honest with you. I lived in a gated community where I lived with only Italians. Okay? They really never looked out for us like that. And I'm telling you the truth. I seen my information, my old address.
Hello?
Just listen. Can you hear me? Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Is it me or is everyone going silent?
I don't know. Can you hear me? Can everybody else hear me?
Yeah, let's I think you're breaking up a little. Let's get back to your question. I'm gonna give Fred and then Black and Falls. 1 second.
The question was.
One second. True, we'll come back to you. Let's give Fred a chance because he's been up here for a minute. Black, Falls, and then we'll go back to you, True.
Okay, can y'all hear me?
Yeah, go for it, Fred.
Yeah, one thing I would like for us to get in our heads, I'm talking about descendants of American slaves. It don't matter who gets to office. Right now, we hold the chips. If they don't get in there and do our bidding, or they have policy that don't look right, don't blame nobody else except yourself if you don't go there to make them tweak it to benefit us. I know sometimes we have to be patient with our people because this is kind of new to us. We've always been too dependent upon other people when it really wasn't necessary and we had the power in our own hands. We're the only legitimate claimants for any type of benefits in this country. And then as far as how to fund reparations, part of it is because it's been misappropriated funds. We stuck ourselves in categories like minority, poor folks, people of color, and when the money went to these groups that did not earn it, that money, if they had just spent that money directly with us, we could have solved a lot of these problems centuries ago. Mute.
100%. Even the total amount of money spent on COVID, that was equivalent to Darity's calculation for the racial wealth gap, and at the time, the equivalent for the 40 acres alone, right? So, and the other thing about this, if you think about the stimulus checks, the unemployment, or the PPP loans, 98% of that money went to non-Black people, right? And then only 2% went to Black people. And then if you look at the stimulus and then unemployment, one, you had to have a job first, and we have the highest unemployment rate out of anybody in the country. And I somewhat, joke that, from 1619 till 1865, the Black unemployment rate was 0, right? So for it to spike suddenly to the highest unemployment rate in the country when immigration increased, it's not an accident, right? And then the other thing to look at is just in general, whatever we're owed, we can literally look at the legislation. Special Field Order 15 stipulated what we owed. That was an executive order. After that, you had 3 months later, March 3rd, 1865, you had the Freedmen Bureau being signed into law and the Freedmen Bank signed into law on the same day. Lincoln was assassinated 5 weeks later, and the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments were not even ratified. And the 14th and 15th Amendments weren't even passed into law at that time. So it was really the Freedmen Bureau and Bank that Lincoln was assassinated for. Marcel, and then we'll go to Falls and then Black.
I actually missed what Fred said because Twitter was acting up, but that's okay. It sounds like I know Fred is very succinct and to the point, so I think I'm good.
Okay, cool. No worries. Falls and then Black.
Hey, thanks for letting me speak. I only have two points. One is a question, and I'm going to ask it first, except you can answer after I make the second point. So the first question is opportunity cost factored into your calculation of reparations? Like, considering that they bombed Black Wall Street, those were thriving communities that would have continued to flourish had they not been destroyed in a bunch of other similar conditions. And then the next point is just here in Alaska, the Alaska Natives have corporations. They receive the ownership of these corporations as a form of reparation. And so what happens is the corporations conduct businesses like any other corporation. But then once the checks come out to the people. You know what I mean? Like they get their checks in perpetuity, just like any other dividend would be paid, and then their children inherit the ownership. So, you know, you have like two Alaska Natives have a baby. That baby is automatically a partial owner in the corporation and automatically receives checks. So those are my questions. Thanks for letting me speak.
Yeah, totally. No, that's great questions. And yes, we did. Actually, what we do is we follow how the UN defines reparations, and they define it in 5 parts. And a lot of people have learned about this, the 5 parts of the last year, but they're defined as follow: restitution, compensation, rehabilitation, satisfaction, and discontinuation. And the one that's most relevant to what you're talking about is not only restitution in terms of the return of property and things like restoration of employment, but under compensation, here's how it's defined. Compensation should be provided for any economically accessible damage as appropriate and proportional to the gravity of the violation and the circumstances of each case, resulting from gross violations of international human rights law and serious violations of international humanitarian law, such as physical or mental harm, B, lost opportunities, including employment, education, and social benefits, C, material damages and loss of earning, including loss of earning potential, and then D, moral damage, and E, costs required for legal or expert assistance, medicine and medical services, and psychological and social services. So you don't have any reparations programs if you don't meet these 5 categories, including the compensation and the parts in talking about lost opportunities, as well as loss of earning potential. And that's extremely important to how we calculate it. Like I said, one calculation is based on the Freedmen Bank, the 40 acres, and the value of our 4 million ancestors' labor and skills. And then that's 6 million if you divide it per freedman, it's 6 million per freedman. And then if you want to base it on the Compensated Emancipation Act, it's 16 million per freedman. So that's kind of like the high and low of the calculations we've come up with so far. But you're right, things like the bombing of Tulsa, that would fall not only under compensation, but also restitution, where whatever was taken, stolen, intellectual property, corporations, things like that, all of that needs to be restored. So it's very important that we make sure we check every box. And actually, I put out a tweet earlier yesterday that was about the Freedmen Bureau and Bank. Those were the first attempts at reparations. And while they implemented restitution, compensation, and rehabilitation, they failed the test of satisfaction and discontinuation of the harm, and guarantees of non-repetition, because all of the compensation, restitution, and rehabilitation was rolled back, right? So it ultimately, what we have to realize going forward is any reparations proposal has to meet these fundamental requirements. Marcel, did you want to add something?
And I want to say a part of my reparations plan, at least, is us having our own police force, but also us having our own militia. Okay, you have, I forgot the percentage, but Black Americans make up something like 30% or more or a little less, somewhere around that much of the U.S. military. And we have lots of Black veterans. I think somewhere like 30% of Black American population are veterans. And then we have people that may not be veterans, but are good marksmen, hand-to-hand combat. You know, we have people who are in tech. There is no reason why we cannot have our own defense systems. Okay? So a part of my plan is not just getting what we're owed, but being able to defend without mercy what we are owed and what we are going to have and what we are going to build. We have people who are skilled in all areas, from chemistry to robotics to penetration, which that is also known as hacking, to all types of areas. We should be able to defend ourselves on all fronts. That's exactly what I plan to do. We could be doing that now. I'm already in contact with Black gun clubs, okay, to form defense systems for us. But I can't do everything. And when I run for office, it's something I plan to implement, for us to have our own defense systems. Because I'll be damned if they think they're going to run up on us again. And by the way, they only did it in the past because they used to outnumber us. And even when they will outnumber us, it will be like 80 white men, it'll be like 12 Black men, and you will have like 7 Black men killed, but you will have like 30 white men killed. I'm like, how in the world did 12 Black men kill 30 out of 80 white men? Because we was whipping them eyes. That's why they use the mall mentality. That's why they use ambush tactics, because they know they can never take us head on. Okay? And still can't. So that's the plan I have to make sure we're protected.
Yeah, and actually what you said, Marcel, just to add to that, I like to go back to Special Field Order 15 and the Freedmen's Bureau Act. Special Field Order 15 said each family shall have a plot of not more than 40 acres of tillable ground, and the military authorities will afford them protection until such time as they can protect themselves. And the Freedmen's Bureau Act similarly said freedmen shall be assigned not more than 40 acres, and the person to whom it was so assigned shall be protected in the use and enjoyment of the land. And even to take this a little deeper, the Special Field Order 15 is even more explicit. So check this part out. It says, no white person whatever, unless military officers and soldiers detailed for duty, will be permitted to reside, and the sole and exclusive management of affairs will be left to the freed people themselves. Right? So, I mean, this is in the Special Field Order 15, right? It's spelled out very clearly. And like Marcel said, South Carolina was the first state to have the Freedmen's Bureau, to have a Freedmen's Bank, right? So the area in which not only the land was doled out, but also the amount of reparations that were owed, all of that needs to be restored. Let's go to Miss Giselle, then, oh, actually, I skipped Black, and then Miss Giselle, and then Miss T, and then Samson, then Sean, and then True. You there, Black?
Yeah, I'm here. We'll start out by saying, man, what's up to all the Black family? Peace to the host and the co-host. I wanted to build on what Marcel said. He took out the same exact talking points that I had. account, and Marcel made a monumental point. Like I said, I've been inside some of these spaces, and these people were saying if black people get reparations, they were going to get guns, they were going to gun us down. They're ready to start World War III if we get reparations. I heard this with my own ears. These white people are serious. So Marcel brought up an excellent point. We must get over that phobia, and I'm speaking from experience. I'm a gun owner, proud gun owner, not just pistols. I have guns. I'll just leave it at that. I know we're in a Twitter space, but we have to get over that phobia in the black community that somehow a firearm is a negative or it's something to be afraid of. So Marcel brought up a great point. If you can join a black gun club, join one. If you can't, start one on your own. But we definitely need to get proficient with firearms. And I also say this too, with Marcel and the Freeman, which I was talking about, these massacres in antiquity during Jim Crow. You got to remember, post-slavery during Jim Crow, I think one of the first laws that were passed was a black man could not own a firearm. So definitely have to remember that, and I'll land my plane and listen.
Exactly. I'm glad you brought that up, Black. This is a great documentary. We'll probably stream it on FNN so people can watch it, but it's like two good documentaries to watch. One is like Negroes and Guns, and it's based on the book by Robert F. Williams. He was part of, at the time, the NAACP and the Deacons for Self-Defense, and he was going around protecting his community, essentially. And he inspired the Black Panther Party as well. That was one of their like readings. And then there's this good documentary where it talks about all the different legislation, the black codes. Well, it not only talks about during slavery what the laws were, like no Negro shall have an arm, no slave shall have like a gun. They had all these laws. And then post-slavery and during post-emancipation, basically, it was the same laws, but instead of slave, they just replaced it with black or Negro or some other type of term like that. And then they also had like gun taxes, basically trying to like increase the price of buying a gun such that it would be unaffordable, right? And so there's all these taxes, or all these tactics that they use to try to keep us disarmed. And both of those documentaries are like a great history of that. Let's see. Next, I think it was Miss Giselle. Yeah, go first.
Let me be very clear. You see, I'm tired of us. For some reason, we're the group that has been under the constant terroristic attack and war, and we walk around here like that has to stop. These white people, like I have one down the street from me. I don't know what's the purpose. I can't say they're white supremacists because that would be unfair, because I don't know if that's what they are. But they literally have those "Don't Tread on Me" flags flying, and they have like barracks set up in their backyard. And I know they're doing some type of physical training. Now, did you know that during the civil rights era, did y'all know that our people used to do physical training? They used to have them take defensive postures so that they would not get really injured if they were being attacked by dogs, water holes, police batons, and more. Now, I've seen documentaries on these white supremacists, because that's what a lot of them are, and other anti-black bigots training, and some of them suck. But I watched one documentary, and the guy who was training them, he was like, these guys suck. He was like, they suck. He was like, they're awful. And one other guy said this is the experience throughout the nation and in Europe, because they go to Europe to train too. He was like, a lot of these guys just aren't cut out for it. Our people weren't training to hurt anyone. They were just trained to make sure they did not get hurt, and they could have easily defended themselves. So what I'm saying is, we need to get in a mindset of survival, wanting to thrive. I'm not saying we can't enjoy ourselves and let our hair down, but we need to always be in a mindset of we are going to defend ourselves and we have a right to defend ourselves. That's why my reparations plan, I have that clause added where we are going to set up our own militias. We're going to have our own defense system, cyber security, you name it, all of it, because we need to have that. And we need to be well armed. And here's the crazy thing. I just left the food drive I did in my hometown. It went extremely well. Oh my goodness, these people cleared out over 500 pounds of Cornish hens and hams. Hey, guess what happened? I was giving them my flyers, right? And the old lady said to me, I said, well, what do y'all like the most on my platform? And some people said, well, some people say, you getting Clyburn up out of there. And some people say, oh, I like, you're talking about Anne's property, which is big issue, my area. Did y'all know that these were mostly old ladies? We have grandmothers and great grandmothers. Did y'all know several of them said, I like this gun stuff you're talking about? Tell me more about that. I kid you not. And anyone who's in the South, y'all know these old ladies, white ladies, black ladies with their big children. Y'all know they always carry guns in their purses. They be the most strapped sometimes. And I kid you not. A lot of them said, I like this gun platform. Yeah, tell me more about that. So our people have never been anti-gun. Don't let the media tell you. I think some of our people may not necessarily register our guns, so the real amount of our people that have guns is not there. My mother ones who have that guns are evil thing. Is one time my father gave her a gun. She got really mad with him, and she gave it to my grandmother and said, "If I don't give it to you, when it comes." So my mother's always had a thing with guns, but our people are not anti-gun. We need to be more well-trained, and we need to be more intentional with being more well-trained, because it may never happen, y'all. Like, I forgot who was just talking. I'm so sorry. Black President, yeah. Black President just said, after slavery ended, yes, one of the first things they did was to make sure we could not be armed. And they did that to disarm us. Obviously, they would like to put us in that situation again where we not going to defend ourselves. But here's the funny thing, y'all. Do y'all know how many lynchings happened? They said it's like around 5,000. We know it's more than that. That's conservative. It was probably really around tens of thousands. But did y'all know it probably would have been millions of them if our people, when a white mob was coming to lynch one of our people would grab their guns and go out on the porch and say, who do you think you come up here to touch? Try it. And I know people personally who have told me stories like that. They would say, my father went out on the porch with a shotgun, and it was a mob of 12 Ku Klux Klan members, and my father said, you can stay on the street, but the moment you step on my property, you're dead. And the Ku Klux Klan will leave. They've always been cowards. They've always been cowards. One of us can a lot of times take 15 of them. One of us untrained can take 15 of them trained sometimes. Because we've had to. We've had to have that survival instinct. So I want to say that, y'all.
Yeah, definitely, Marcel. Let me add two things and I'll pass the mic. One thing I want to say is a lot of our ancestors got their first arms because they fought in a war, whether it be the American Revolution, the Civil War, or any of the world wars that have happened, or even the smaller wars. That's how most of us got their first arms. And when you look back in history about times where people were either being lynched or defending themselves against lynchers, a common story you'll hear is that there's some veterans that came together to protect whoever. And even during the Tulsa Massacre, those were the people who came to the courthouse or jailhouse to rescue that kid that they accused of raping that girl in the elevator, right? And then there's this great story I learned about. Many of us have heard of Medgar Evers. He had a brother named Charles Edgars, right? And he tells this story about his brother and his dad and how one day they went to go vote, and basically they were kind of like intimidated. They tried to intimidate them to not go vote, right? And later that day, they basically tried to come to kill some people at their house, and his dad basically had his gun, over his lap, waiting for anybody to come through. And when the people finally left because they knew they couldn't do anything, the dad went back into the backyard and whistled, and all his neighbors came up out of the grass with their straps. And I thought it was such a dope story. I'm like, they was ready. So that's the type of energy we need to have, where we're really willing to protect each other. And even one of the first things that the Black Panther Party did is form it for self-defense, and they went around patrolling the Oakland police. And basically, if the Oakland police stopped anybody, they would get out and be armed and, you know, make sure nothing happened to that person. If that person got arrested, they would go to the jailhouse and bail them out. So that's the level of like thought we have to have and care we have to have for each other and be willing to, you know, put our lives on the line. Like think about like the George Floyd situation, for example. Like there should have been freedmen there that were armed, able to protect him from that execution, right? So that's where we got to get to. I think next was Miss Giselle, and then Miss T, Sean, and then Samson.
Yeah, hey everybody, good evening, and happy, what is this, the 11th day? MLK Day, anyway, initiatives, the 11th day into this. And big ups to everybody who's been sharing their posts, texting it to their relatives, getting ready to go outside and pass out these flyers if you haven't already done so. We do appreciate you for that. And I came up here, thanks for the invite up to the stage. Marcel, you hit the nail on the head, but when you said what you said, you made me think of like 5 different training development programs that you can create. First of all, we got to get somebody to do the training. That's a whole organization that you can franchise across the country. You can have yearly or semi-yearly, conventions where they discuss those issues. And then when we talk about gun safety, these white people give their kids guns for birthday gifts at 2 and 3 years old. They scare our youth. These kids are shooting in the middle of the woods. That's why they like us in the hood. They take us out of the country. That's practice area. You in the hood, you ain't going to know how to shoot. That's why when you hear about the shootings that we do in the neighborhood, people get shot in all of the crazy spots, like in the ankles or something. It's not anything like, and it take a couple of shots before, but anyway, I think you can actually utilize this, that whole area. Not only can we develop like a revenue stream and a business model under the gun push that you're trying to do, but that can be replicated across the entire country, depending on the state gun laws. Another thing that I wanted to add with this, I don't know if we're still talking about the how can we fund. We still talking about the how can we fund reparations, right?
Well, we're winding down now, but yeah, you can still talk about it, of course.
Oh yeah, no, because the how can we fund reparations thing had fun for everything. We already know. I was just gonna say, they just print money pretty much. That's all they did. And they got money in ghost accounts that just randomly appear, like from a whole bunch of stuff, including the money that's being fueled into the weaponry that's being shipped over to Ukraine right now. So it's like a lot of areas where we can get that money from. People always look at it from a tax perspective, but I mean, why not? We pay taxes for everybody else. That's what I was going to say about that. But Marcel, I like that gun idea.
Yeah, just on that really quickly. Earlier we talked about how, like, instead of the most commonly thought way of funding things, which is usually through tax revenue, we could actually fund this with bonds. So we have a proposal that, would basically have the Treasury Department sell bonds to, like, the Federal Reserve, for example. The Federal Reserve would credit the Treasury Department, and then the money would be sent out that way. Marcel has a similar proposal with bonds as well, that people would get paid interest every year off of the bonds. So I think no matter what bonds are the solution, it's not going to be through tax revenue. And then on the gun club idea, there is this organization called NAGA. It's like the NRL for us, kind of, or NRA for us. And they're doing a really great job. So one of the things we encourage in the Freedmen Party is if there's a NAGA chapter near you, to join it. It's your local black gun club. And, they practice on ranges and, learn about safety. They actually also have an annual convention. So I would encourage people to join NAGA. If there's not a NAGA in your area, then I would encourage you to either contact NAGA or just form your own thing.
And there's another one too. It's called the El Geronimo Pratt Gun Club. They were the ones that showed up when that pull-up was done in Texas and made it into the Daily Mail. They're in Texas, they're in Oklahoma, they're in Texas, they're in Georgia. They came to the reparations summit that NAASD did. I met them. They're great. They're incredible. They're pro reparations. They just don't do gun marksmanship. They do hand-to-hand combat as well, and they're trying to spread. So El Geronimo Pratt. Can I put those things in the Jumbotron?
Yes, definitely do.
Okay.
Put the NAGA one if you can too. I'll try to find the link myself. But if anybody could put the NAGA one and the guy is actually named after a Black Panther, which is kind of cool.
Oh, and the last thing, though, the Freedmen Party is the self-defense portion today. Because us having our own police department, having that self-defense addition to a program like that, that would be amazing. Again,
Yep.
You can teach that in youth. That can branch off to women's safety. That can branch off to like a youth safety program. That can be, again, replicated across the country.
Yes.
So that is a great idea.
Definitely, and I always go back again to Special Field Order 15, where it talked about the sole and exclusive management will be for us, and it included our ability to protect ourselves and everything. So I think that's fundamental. You're not going to have the the Tops massacre in Buffalo happen by someone driving into our place when we're ready to protect ourselves. They're not going to want to do that. Let's just say that. They tried to go to a vulnerable place, right? But if they know that we're protected, like our supermarkets, our places of worship, our schools, our workplace, they should all be protected, right? And that's the type of things that are missing right now in terms of the enforcement of what needs to be done. Next, let's go to Miss T, and then Samson, then Shauna R, and then we'll wind down and do last thoughts before we get up out of here.
Okay, thank you, Freedmen Party. Miss Giselle, did you get to land your plane? Okay, I guess she did. Hey, Marcel, hello to everybody in the room. Great to see you all in this new prosperous year. Let's just make it a very successful year. Freedmen Party, it was one area that I would like to submit for consideration in your figures of how much is owed to us. There was that Homestead Act of the 160 acres that was given to immigrants that came over from Europe that we were shut out of. So not only was our 40 acres reneged on and taken from us, we were not able to receive the 160 acres plus the training and development and the machinery to work the land. Can you consider calculating how much we lost from just being shut out of that as well and add that to the figure?
I've already included that. The black tax, Miss T, they kind of break all that down, and that's why they say at a minimum is 70 trillion. That's including the 70 trillion too. Now, remember, I'm gonna clarify what you said. The Homestead Act was more than 160 acres. You have to understand, white America and European immigrants were given 300 million acres. They were given 10% of the entire United States of America. That is $10 trillion in today's value. $10 trillion to them, no questions asked. Not only that, they were then given grants later on by the United States Department of Agriculture, colleges, machines to mechanize and monetize their land. Okay? Not only that, there were several Homestead Acts. They were given white men property to come from England to live in America. They gave, after the Revolutionary War, soldiers in Virginia land. They gave Abraham Lincoln and wives especially 300 million acres, $10 trillion. But there was this Southern Homestead Act that was supposed to be for black Americans, all went to white Americans as well. So when I say my direct payment, it includes that. But the Freedmen's Bureau that I'm going to bring back, they're going to be given a budget as well of $70 trillion. And don't quote me on that because I don't have my plan in front of me and I don't look at it every day. But they're going to be given a budget as well of at least 30 to 70 trillion, where they're going to be able to acquire land to incentivize us to come back to the South to get back to black farming. That's going to be the land grants. That's going to be the business grants. So we're going to get direct cash payments. But the Freedmen's Bureau, which is going to be our own agency, our own government, they're going to also have other programs they're going to initiate to make up for those lost opportunities.
Yeah, I can't argue with Marcel. I agree with everything he said. It's super important to understand, just to add a little bit, the Homestead Act, you could go to the National Park Service website. They have the figure for how many living descendants there are for the Homestead Act. And they calculated around 90 million living descendants of the Homestead Act today.
And that was in the year 2000.
Yeah, exactly. So think about that, 90 million living beneficiaries of the Homestead Act. So when all of those 90 million try to tell us to lift ourselves by their bootstrap, and they are the ones who are still benefiting from the Homestead Act, it's hypocrisy. So
yeah, and just to add on to that, when I'm speaking to my family, like I have the entire history of the plantation that my family was on in South Carolina. And this person was granted 703-acre land grant. So, I mean, these people are still in that house. They still own that land. I think they lost some of it, but they still make money off of that land. So,
but check this out. My great grandfather, Quash Fripp, who married my great grandmother, they could be great, I can't remember, Molly Fripp, they were enslaved on the Fripp plantation, which is today's Fripp Island, South Carolina, which is today one of the wealthiest islands on the East Coast. The white Fripps have the land, they have the money, they have the palaces, they don't struggle for nothing. The black Fripps caused my family, my siblings and I, my father, we struggle.
yeah, no, that's deep. Thank you, Marcel and A Boogie, for sharing those two personal anecdotes. I think it's important, and this is, we're doing that Trace Your Lineage challenge, and these stories are so important for us to share with each other. Each of us has a unique history. There was around 4 million freedmen emancipated in 1865, around like 7,000 in 1866 from the 5 tribes. So about like 99% of the freedmen alive today, you have to basically descend from one of these freedmen, you know what I mean? So from them to now, there's a beautiful story of how you got here, and knowing that we've experienced genocide, like there's going to be something like miraculous in that journey that kind of will tell you why you're still here, despite all of the things that were built to try to destroy us, right? So, definitely honor your ancestors by tracing your lineage, and it's going to be a beautiful story. I think next was Samson, and then Samson, then Sean, and then Brandon.
Okay, yeah, greetings, FBA family, Freedman family, and all that's in attendance at the moment. I just wanted to kind of piggyback on what you said, Marcel, about our military unit being a necessary component that we need to have. It was necessary actually yesterday. Y'all are listening to someone who actually has been attacked by suspected white supremacists. I thought they might have been Proud Boys, but whatever they were, I've been attacked by them in the past. And that was not based on anything that I started, but something they started. There's a lot of these people that actively want to have a race war. It's something that they've been planning. It's something that they desire, and they're trying to figure out a way to start it. It's not something we want to start, obviously, but it's something we can finish if we have to. Hopefully it doesn't get to that point.
Well, hold on, Samson. I'm sorry, let me interrupt you. We have been in a race war. White people have the privilege of not being in one if they choose not to. Black Americans have been in a race war. They've launched a race war against us as we came on these shores here, and they never stopped. Now, not all white Americans are participating in that war against us, but to be truthfully told, if you are neutral in the race war, if you're not against the anti-black bigots, I'm not gonna say white people, because they're not all white. Some of them don't like white people either. They just hate us, and they'll work with the white supremacists too. If you are not on Black American side in this race war, then you are actively on something against Black Americans. There's only two sides in a race war in America. You're either for Black Americans or you're against Black Americans. The side that is for us is the side that's on the right side. So, no, white Americans have the privilege of choosing not to be in a race war. We don't. We're born into one, and some of us just haven't got the memo yet. And you being tall and, being, like Saddam, a larger, so they're going to all badly see you as a larger threat who needs to be neutralized.
Exactly. Now, Marcel, you hit the nail on the head, and when we look at genocide as a collective.
I want to finish landing because I cut
Yeah, go for it, Samson.
Yeah, no, excellent point. We have been at one, as I found out in the incident I was in, and of course the cops showed up and immediately took their side without seeing what had happened, because the Black person is always going to be wrong when they're dealing with white people in any form of conflict to police officers that are suspected white supremacy. All that to say that these people want violence against us, and we should have been prepared. Like you said, Marcel, yesterday, they've already, a lot of them have already declared war upon us. So it's up to us how we're going to respond. We do need our own military unit, and we need our own police force. And maybe part of this police force could be investigative for betrayal, because we know with the Black Panthers, historically, the reason they were able to take them down so successfully, besides obviously murdering Fred Hampton and, white supremacist law enforcement murdering many of their leaders, but also because of infiltration and sending traitors into the Black Panthers' home, actually, some of their homes, not just the organization, but even their very own homes. So we also need our own police force, and part of that police force's duty should include investigating potential traitors, because we know that they'll arrive. We don't know how many it will be, but they will send at least some, and we will need to be prepared for that as well. I'll end my plane on that.
Let me tell you, we're going to not only have our own police force, we're going to have our own system too. Our own judicial system. Y'all, this is all of my platform. It's been on there. It's in there.
Yeah, we had Freedmen Courts as part of the Freedmen Bureau, and in addition to all of this, I think we have to understand, like, we have to have the means to protect ourselves. That's so fundamental. Once we get our reparations, like you said, like, we have to be able to protect it from white supremacist violence. If you go back to the early creation of the Department of Justice, it was created for the purpose of protecting Black Americans from white supremacist violence. Now, it has certainly not lived up to that task, but that's actually why it was founded, the DOJ, the Department of Justice, right? And so we really have to realize, like, we have to upgrade all of these institutions in the same way the American Indians have the Bureau of Indian Affairs and the Bureau of Indian Education. We're going to have the Freedmen's Bureau and the Freedmen Bank. And part of the Freedmen Bureau will have the schools, the hospitals, and the courts. So it's super important that we have all of these parts together working in concert. Sean R. and then Brandon, and then we'll close out.
I was just going to say that, as a female and a mother, naturally, that's one thing that I'm concerned about is us being able to protect ourselves and our families. It just seems like we've always had to be able to protect our own selves. I don't think that anybody is like, we have to do it ourselves. I don't believe that we're going to get much help from anyone else besides freemen or descendants of slaves. And I say that because looking at history and what happened in Reconstruction, the Union soldiers were brought down to the South, and they were supposed to be protecting us from white backlash former slave owners. But when you look at the massacres that happened in the South during Reconstruction, I mean, it's ridiculous. It's like most of the massacres that happened in the South was during Reconstruction. So as far as I'm concerned, although we were supposed to be protected, we were never protected, and we're never going to be protected unless we protect ourselves. And so as much as, guns make me uneasy, I know that it's something that's going to be necessary and required. And the closer we do get to reparations, I do believe there's going to be a form of backlash. And so, yes, we do need to protect ourselves.
You know what's better than a backlash? A frontlash. We need to be proactive. I'm not going to be sitting on my porch and say, oh, and they coming, Lord help me. No, we need to be doing a frontlash. We need to be ready for that action. Okay? That's what we need to do, a frontlash. We don't need to be sitting here scared. Let me tell you, I don't feel, you know what's funny? I've lived in what can be considered a hood my entire life. A hood is not a hood is a place and a condition. It's a concentration of impoverished people. And you know what? I have never wanted to move into like a white suburban area. Never wanted to live around white people. I've always been at home and felt safe with my own people. Always, even in the most dangerous hood, I've always felt safe with my own people. When I'm driving through like a town, going like to Georgia, or coming back from Georgia to South Carolina, if I'm driving through a town and I'm driving past the stores, I always look to see what's the demographic of people. So when I see a bunch of black people, I feel at ease. We've always felt safe with each other. That's why we need to move back south. We're scattered throughout this nation. We're scattered about like a damn spider web. Spider webs are incredibly strong. But the wider they spread, sometimes it's easier to stick our hand and wipe them away. We need to move back south. We need to get concentrated in a geographic region where we can have each other's backs. Just like in the old days. You came to Negro and tried to lynch one Negro, and damn it, you let them lynch us all. We all came out of the porch of our shotgun. We're back in an area where we are all concentrated. We can have each other's backs. Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, South Carolina, Maryland, those states right now have 30% population or higher. We need to be there so we can have each other's backs right now. That way, if someone tries us, we're right next to each other. We can get you. Second of all, they're trying to use robots now. These little anti-black robots they're going to be trying to do. Let me tell you, nothing is unhackable. Nothing. And anyone who's in the world of hacking knows that. Nothing is unhackable. We're going to take those same robots, we're going to reprogram them, and the same way they're going to try to program us, them to turn everybody black in a concentration camp, we're going to reprogram it to go right after them. If these anti-black things, that's what they're going to do. So we need to do a frontlash, okay? Backlash. How dare anyone have a backlash to us getting justice? The only backlash, the only group that's right to give a backlash is us against all the hate we've been shown. So here's that. Let's go on. Let's come on back south. Let's be strategic, and let's get me in office and help the reparationists. I don't care if they're white. I don't care if they're black. Some of y'all can sit there and cry yourself to sleep. If I'm supporting a white reparationists, if they're going to do reparations done, I don't give a damn if they're purple. Cry yourself to sleep. It's going to be all right. Grab your teddy bear, cry about it, yell at the sky, whatever. We need the reparations office so we can get this platform implemented.
Hey, Marcel, and to what Sean said, then I'll go to Brandon. One of the things when I was looking at the timeline of like Reconstruction and things like that, I started to ask myself, like, when did Reconstruction end? Like, how were things undone? How was the Freedmen Bureau undone? How was the Freedmen Bank undone? How was all of these things rolled back? And when you look at the timeline, you basically get, again, March 3rd, 1865, you get the Freedmen Bureau and Bank signed into law. Again, before the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments were even ratified. Then, in about 1872, the Freedmen Bureau gets basically destroyed. In fact, in the original Freedmen's Bureau Act, there's like a time bomb in it that says for 1 year after, during the current rebellion and for 1 year after the war, this is how long this institution will exist. So there was a time bomb in that legislation that we have to remove and make it for perpetuity, for forever, essentially. And then the second thing with the Freedmen Bank, in 1874, the Freedmen Bank was robbed. There was a stock market crash, And there was, in the original Freedmen Bureau charter, there's about like 9 members who were like all like, Europeans, you know what I mean? So no freedmen were the trustees of the bank, and they all wasted the $57 million, which is the modern day equivalent of $1.3 trillion, trying to save their failed investments outside of the Freedmen Bank, right? So they basically looted the bank in order to prop up their investment. It was the railroad, yes, exactly. They had invested in all of these railroads going, and the railroads were literally like being built side by side to each other. It was so ridiculous. And so eventually you had consolidation, but that event, then the next thing in 1870, was it 1876? Compromise of 1876. You have essentially a presidential election when the Republicans and Democrats are going at it, right? The Republicans are basically supposed to be pro-freedmen. The Democrats are supposed to be anti-freedmen, right? But here's what they do in 1876. They meet over a contentious election in which some people are saying, oh, well, if you make this person president, we're going to revolt and this and that, right? So very similar conditions to the Gore, Bush, and Trump Biden thing when it was very contentious. So they used this moment to create a backroom deal. There's actually congressional legislation behind it, and it was set up such that there was 5 Republicans, 4 Democrats that would vote on who wins the presidential election. And to agree to this deal, the Republicans agreed to the Democrats that they would remove the troops, the Union troops in the South, protecting the freedmen. And as a result, the Democrats would allow the Republicans to win the presidency. That happened in 1876, and that was really the death knell of Reconstruction. After that, we had no real protections, and essentially the Ku Klux Klan had already been formed at that point, and so this gave them a boost in the sense that they knew they would not meet a Union soldier or anyone trying to protect us, and they can just try to violate our rights. And so that was, when you think about Reconstruction from like 1865 to about like 1874, 76, that was when we had some amount of protection where, 100,000 of our ancestors, even after the 40 acres were taken away, they could still save up $1.3 trillion in today's money, which is like 12 million each for them, right? On average. So like once that protection went away, once the bank was looted, once the Freedmen Bureau was undone, and that compromise of 1876 election was made, that was the end of Reconstruction. So yeah.
Eric, I just wanted to say that real quick.
Yeah.
That and that was really my point, was that during that Reconstruction period we were supposed to be protected, but most of the massacres in the South happened during that period, and then after that it was like every 10 years or something. But I just feel like we're never going to be protected the way we're supposed to be. We have to take it upon ourselves to protect ourselves.
Right. We will be protected where we're supposed to be, but it's going to come from us. And the way it comes from us is by us getting in power. You see, they kill you politically first, then they kill you physically. So when some of us are sitting here talking about something, we can small farm our way into power, we can black business our way into power. No, we got to get in political power. Once you die politically, then you get killed physically. That's why they kept us out of voting. That's why they assassinated and tried to get rid of some of the black congressmen. Because they know kill someone politically, there's no consequences to killing them physically. That's why I'm telling us to run for office. And by the way, there were people who said, line up every Confederate and blow their heads off. Okay? There are many white Democrats, white Republicans, that time the Republicans were the party that was for us, who wanted to kill every Confederate. That's what this country should have done. Abraham Lincoln sat there and pussyfooted, and I don't know, and then one of them ended up killing him. So my point is, anti-blackness always ends up killing and hurting white people the most too. So this ain't just for us, it's for them too. It always backfires on them.
Yeah, definitely agree with you there. If we're not protected, any of the experiments they perform, the surveillance, any of these things, they try on us first, and then it gets spread out to the rest of the country. That's without a doubt. Brandon, it's on you, and then we'll wrap up.
I'm gonna end.
Yeah, yeah, go for it, Marcel.
Let me be clear. Let me be very clear. That compromise of 1877, that's the beginning of the black people, you have to save America attitude. They compromised to save quote unquote America, while no, the massacres didn't happen during Reconstruction. They happened after Reconstruction. After the troops were pulled out of the South, that's when there was full-fledged genocidal violence. But it wasn't just in the South. It was already happening in the Midwest, the Northeast, the West Coast, other areas as well. That's the beginning of where Black Americans are supposed to suffer for the good of the nation. And somehow we're supposed to be noble and suffer. They pulled the troops of the South knowing that was going to be genocidal violence, but they felt it saved America, only for us to be taking the brunt of the violence and the violence that would eventually spread. No more us, the compromise is being to our detriment. Hell no. That's why I'm not romanticizing any more compromises where quote unquote America is safe, but Black America is not. If Black America is not safe, then America is not safe.
Exactly. No, that's hugely important. And just one last thing about that. Realize that it was both the Republicans and Democrats who came to this agreement. So when people say, oh, Republicans, oh, Democrats, no, both of these parties will betray us at any moment if it benefits them over us, right? They have no fundamental incentive to back us. And the way I kind of try to demonstrate that starkly is, like, the same way our agenda is not being heard by the Republicans or the Democrats. Think about if a group of white supremacists wanted to join the Freedmen Party and take it over. Do you think we would follow their agenda? You think we would be like, yeah, let's go do what they want? No, we would be like, this is Freedmen first. That's what we're focusing on. So, when you put it in that sense, you kind of can understand, like, these people are never going to look out for us. We got to do it our own. Brandon, it's on you.
Yes, I have a quick question. What is the difference between the 14 trillion that's in Sandy Darity and Bob Johnson's plan and the 70 trillion that's in Marcel's plan?
Well, just really quickly on that, one of the most interesting things that I discovered with talking to Darity about this, because initially he did a calculation based on the 40 acres that was around 2.5 trillion. This was back around like earlier 2019, a little bit before that. Then when I finally got to meet him and ask him about his recent calculation of like 14 trillion, because at the time I had calculated the 40 acres to be 14 trillion. So I was like, did you base that off of the racial wealth gap, or did you base it off of the value of the 40 acres? And he actually told me he didn't base the 14 trillion off of the 40 acres at that point. He had based it off of the racial wealth gap. So the interesting insight there was, even though it was two different calculations, the amount of money for the racial wealth gap and the amount of money for the 40 acres are equivalent. In 2023 dollars, it's 17.5 trillion. But again, that doesn't include the 1.3 trillion stolen from the Freedmen Bank, and it doesn't include the value of our ancestors' labor, which is around $246 trillion in today's money. So we have our calculations around like 6 million per freedman if you base it off of all of those three, or 16 million if you base it off of the Compensated Emancipation Act in 1862, which was $300 then, which would be the modern day equivalent of 16 million. Marcel has done a good plan when he's added what he mentioned, the black tax and all of the things to up to 17 trillion. Marcel, you want to keep going and explain kind of how you got there?
So pretty much economists use different formulas. Some just do, let's go with the racial wealth gap. Some count the price of a quote-unquote enslaved person, which is quite disgusting, but at the end of slavery would have been somewhere between 42 to 84 trillion. My plan really does 4 million, and we do, I don't have it in front of me, because I'm just quoting my own plan. I don't read it every day, but we do like $10 to $12 an hour, considering they would have worked pretty much like 12 hours a day, Monday through Saturday, with Sunday off, and we come up with the price from that. So some people use different formulas, and that's where people get different numbers. Some people, there have been people who are against reparations that have actually come up with an amount far higher than 70 trillion, far higher, and they are against reparations. Yet even they say, okay, damn, like really, if we were to pay people what they are owed just from slavery alone, it would be way higher than 70 trillion.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So, me and Marcel, we're still on the same page. We're using bonds in order to fund, and our calculations are in the trillions, tens of trillions. And either way, you're going to have to pay this over a lifetime. And the idea is that we're going to get everything we're owed. We're not going to just settle for, just the 40 acres, just closing the racial wealth gap, or just returning the money in the Freedmen Bank. We're coming for everything we're owed. And so that's why the debt is so high, and it's just going to be paid out over this time period until it's finished, because we're not going to settle for less ultimately, and I don't think we should. And I always reference the Compensated Emancipation Act. That 3-to-1 ratio means that these slave owners were paid $45 million each. That's, to me, like, just disgusting. So with that, anybody have any last thoughts before we wrap up? Lamar, you just hopped on stage. Did you want to say anything? Can you hear me, Lamar? If not, anybody else have last thoughts before we wrap up? We'll be back tomorrow.
So the 40 trillion, the 14 trillion is just to close the racial wealth gap, and the 70 trillion includes more than that.
Exactly. Both Marcel's calculations and our calculations not only would close the racial wealth gap, it would be everything we're owed, not just part of what we're owed, basically. Like basically, if you steal $100 from me and then gamble that $100 and lose and only have $10 left, I'm still owed $100. I don't care if you got $10 left, right? So that's kind of where the argument of like, no, you have to pay everything you owe. Just because you got 400 years of free, or 265 years of free labor and then blew the money, no, we're still owed everything, especially what you did afterwards. So yeah, we're not just settling for one thing. We're going for the whole enchilada.
What is that whole enchilada? Because I'm still trying to figure out what the difference is between the racial wealth gap, the 14 trillion, and where does the rest of the 70 trillion come from exactly?
Okay, the racial wealth gap is a low ball. Black Americans, we're not just trying to say, okay, well, let's close the racial wealth gap so we can have the same gap as white Americans. So we're saying a country owes us a debt. Okay, this country owes us a debt. We're talking about not just the wages of chattel slavery that we never got. We're not just talking about the 40 acres of the mule that we never got. We're also talking about the Black Wall Streets and other prosperous towns that were built, that were destroyed by outright mob violence, eminent domain. We're talking about Jim Crow, redlining, vagrancy laws, sharecropping, death is prison, conscripted labor. We're talking about all the opportunities that were lost. We're talking about government programs like the Homestead Act that gave $10 trillion to white Americans and European immigrants that Black Americans didn't get a penny from. We're talking about the GI Bill that everyone says made the modern American middle class, that many Black Americans, like my great-grandfather who is still alive, this ain't no long time ago, was locked out of, that gave somewhere like $2 to $3 trillion into 16 million white veterans, while Black veterans were largely excluded. So this is not just about making Black Americans quote unquote equal white Americans. It's not about equality or inequality. It's about this country owes Black Americans a debt because this government was intrinsic in the wrong that was done. These were not citizens doing awful things to Black Americans. This was the federal government, our actual government, depriving Black Americans of their constitutional right, locking us out of wealth while literally giving wealth to other groups. So that's where it comes from. This is a debt that is owed. This is not about we got to be on the same footing with white Americans. This is about this country owes us a debt. This is not saying that other groups have not been done wrong, but this is saying that Black Americans have been done wrong, and we've been the group that's been done wrong the longest in America, and that is owed the most by America, and yet for some reason always gets the flack as if we have done something bad to America.
Exactly. And just to add to what Marcel said, I mentioned this before. In terms of the calculations that we've made, right? There's two, a high and a low end. The low end combines the Freedman Bank, the 40 acres and a mule, and the value of our ancestors' labor and skills. All that combined would equate to $6 million per freedman in reparations. The other one is based on the Compensated Emancipation Act. $300 given to slave owners for every person they emancipated. That's the modern day equivalent of $16 million. So we say we're either owed at minimum $6 million or at max $16 million in terms of those two calculations. And that's the enchilada. That's what we're owed in terms of a minimum and a maximum range.
Is that different from the 3 million individual payments that's on Marcel's website?
Yes, the 3 million individual payments is what we do for all of those things I just named to you. The Freedmen's Bureau will come around and have a budget of their own. The same way Native American crazy governments have like their budgets that they get, and they pretty much can spend the money however they like. There's no big government hovering over them. They get autonomy. The Freedmen's Bureau is going to be our Black America's quote unquote government. It's going to be separate from the government, but the government is going to give us our budget, and they are going to be able to incentivize Black farming, incentivize us to return to the South. They're going to do business grants. They're going to host the classes where people have to develop business plans, because it's called my Black Wall Street Initiative. And we're going to be bringing back Black Wall Street. I mean, I know all the Republicans and Libertarians, they love themselves some businesses, so we're going to have our Black businesses. We're going to do land grants. They're going to also see the construction of Freedmen hospitals, Freedmen schools, Freedmen banks. I say to anyone, if you can't stand Black Americans, you need to be on the front line for reparations. This is the quickest way for us to get away from you. I say to anyone, if you love America, the best thing you can do is be on the front line for reparations. America has laws. America could have been at least twice as rich if it had done reparations in the year 2000.
Yeah, let me actually add something to that, because this blew my mind when I actually looked it up. So I was looking at the land mass, because there's a lot of talk about China versus the US, right? So I was just curious. I was like, okay, China has like 1.4 billion people. We have about 330 million, right? So I was curious, like, what is our land mass, right? Well, when you calculate what is the land mass of the United States and what is the land mass of China, they're virtually identical, but they have over 1 billion people more than us. Then I was like, okay, well, some people may say, well, that's just because of overpopulation. They're just overpopulated, so that's why they have so many people. Well, if you look at India, India has a third of the land mass of the United States and China, but they have 1 billion more people than the United States. So it has nothing to do with overpopulation. Without our genocide from 1619 till today, the U.S. would have over 1 billion people in population, and a lot of them would be us. So that's kind of how we have to understand things on a scale of our genocide. And then let's go to Samson, then our brother Divine from the U.S. Freedmen Project. Shout out to y'all doing that work on the East Coast. Samson, go for it, and then we'll go to Divine. You there, Samson? If not, we'll go to...
Yeah, my fault, man. I couldn't hear anybody for some reason. It's Twitter acting up again as usual. Yeah, I just wanted to add one more comment because Marcel, you're doing excellent work, and I've looked at a little bit of your plan. I just wanted to add that I think that whatever you are asking for monetarily as far as our reparations, I would almost suggest maybe we increase it even more based on just the fact of we're dealing with the American government, and historically speaking, we know that they tend to lowball everybody. Now maybe not, okay, let me rephrase that, not everybody, because we know when they've given money to white people, there's almost limitless amounts, but when it comes to us and other disenfranchised groups who are non-white, we know how they tend to react in terms of police brutality payouts and things like that. I almost think we should have set the amount we think we need or is accurate, and then ask for more than that amount. That's all I wanted to add.
Yeah, I would say definitely we got to ask for the maximum amount. You know what I mean?
We're not asking.
Yeah. No, I was just gonna say we got to ask for the maximum amount. No matter what, the way economics works and the way these people have been built is to always, like you said, try to lowball you. So you ask for what you need and they'll give you less. You know what I mean? So you know, we definitely are going to ask for what we're owed. We're not going to be asking for what just to close, like we said, the racial wealth gap or anything like that. That's the racial wealth gap is the bare minimum. And like I mentioned to Brandon, the fact that the calculation for the racial wealth gap and the 40 acres in the middle are identical despite being two independent calculations, that's not an accident, right? And so, you know, we got to say, okay, well, we're not going to just stop there. Y'all stole 1.3 trillion from the Freedmen Bank, and then y'all never paid our ancestors for their labor, and that was valued at the modern day equivalent of $246 trillion. And so we have all the receipts. So, you know, in terms of arguing, I think we should argue for the maximum, and then fight to stick to that, and make it happen. Marcel, did you want to add something before we hop to Divine?
Nope. I mean, you got it. All I'm saying is we're not asking, but I know what you mean, though.
Exactly. Demanding, I should say. Divine, go for it, brother.
What's going on, host? What's going on, Marcel? Hey, Buggy. Just wanted to. Marcel said something that just, you know, stirred my spirit up, as he is, you know, known to do when he starts talking. But I feel like this needs to be said only because somebody's on. Samson, your mic is hot. There we go. Yeah, so I was having a conversation with somebody here in New York, and I just want to make sure we reiterate this because it comes around every once in a while, but, you know, especially in the month of January when people are making all type of resolutions and they're making vision boards and they're making goals and setting them for the year. I think there's something that needs to be said, and Marcel, like I said, touched on it. Black, and in this case, American Freedmen business and supporting other American Freedmen businesses. And if you decide to support other Black businesses, that's your business and that's fine too. But what needs to be said and known is that will never and can never replace the need for reparations and for us to advocate for ourselves politically and or run for office, as Marcel has said. There's a myth that has long been going on and has plagued our community. And like I said, every January it comes back around, and you got all these people that come up against reparations that start talking about all these other solutions that will never, can never, and have never worked. And unfortunately, supporting quote unquote Black business is one of the most persistent ones because it is a good thing. And it is something that we should do. So I'm not saying that we shouldn't, but I need everyone to understand that supporting it does not lead to this manna from heaven coming down where group economics saves us from the hole that the government dug for us and put us in and tried to bury us in. So support Black business, support American Freedmen business if you can, and you should, but know that it will never replace what reparations will replace and give back to us because it's a debt owed. Even if Black business or Freedmen business could fill the needs of our community, the debt is still owed. And so that's just the bottom line. But the fact of the matter is that it can't and it won't because of what was done to us. See, there's not another demographic in this country that has group economics their way to their status or their financial economic positioning or wealth position in this country. That is a farce. That is a lie. There is not another people group that has done it without governmental policies, funding, subsidies, and flat out giveaways. And so we are no different. And so I just want that to be known. So when you see the people that are hawking these and trying to sell you these programs and teach you how to start a business, and that's all it's going to take, and if we just do Black business, mind our business, and support each other, then we're going to make it to where we need to be, that is a lie. And the numbers don't add up. And the numbers will never add up because, unfortunately, and I'll close with this, 95% of all Black business, and that includes Black immigrant business, have 1 to 0 employees. Let me say that again. 95% of all black business in America, which includes black immigrants, have 1 to 0 employees. That means we are in no big businesses by design. So when someone says, well, let's just open up a grocery store, or let's open up an airport, or let's open up a gun store, those things cost money and require wealth and social capital that we were locked out of. So again, support businesses. Let's do that. But there can be no true black or American freedmen big business without American freedmen reparations. Period. And full stop. Men lie, women lie, numbers don't lie. And I implore you to look up the wealth numbers if you feel otherwise, so you can get the true picture of what is at stake and why reparations is literally economic life and death for us, and in a lot of cases, physical life and death for us. Thank you for the space, brothers.
Yes, yo. Let me say 2 things really quickly, because I think you put out a tweet earlier this week or over the last week where you said something like, you know, even if we had like basically, you know, done the best, even though we got screwed over, had all these huge companies and all this whatever great stuff, we would still be owed reparations, right? And I totally agree with you there. I thought that was a great tweet. The other thing, when you said, you know, men lie, women lie, numbers don't, you know, on my own personal journey, I had to kind of realize this as well, and it wasn't an easy thing to accept. I was like, I looked up, like, okay, like how many millionaires are there in the United States? How many billionaires are there in the United States? How many are across the world and all this stuff? What is global wealth and all these things, right? So here's the conclusion I came to. I was like, okay, at the time, Darity had his calculation was around like $5 trillion for reparations, right? And then I was like, okay, well, let's just imagine someone could create like a $5 trillion company. Okay, that's not enough because you only have 1% of that company. Like Bezos only has 10% of like Amazon, $1 trillion company, so he's $100 billionaire, right? So, okay, what would you need to get a company to even be at the $5 trillion number at that point? Well, you would need something like, you know, say a $20 trillion company and you own a fourth of it, right? Let's say, right? That would be, you would be personally worth $5 trillion, but then you would need to sell all your shares and kind of give the money away, right? Just as a thought experiment, right? So I did the numbers. I said, okay, you either need 1 million, one freedman on code that's worth like, you know, $5 trillion, and they decide to give all their money away, or you need 5,000 freedmen that are billionaires that all come together to do that. There's only 500 Fortune 500 companies, and there's only about 3,000 billionaires globally. So if you try to double the number of billionaires in the entire world, like these are just numbers that are just not fathomable. And then you say, okay, well, how many millionaires would we need? And you say, okay, well, if we could get everyone as a black billionaire, how much could we do collectively? Like basically all these numbers are not feasible in terms of individual achievement, which means there's no amount of individual achievement that any of us could do to close the racial wealth gap. And that speaks to something very deep, going back to what Divine and Marcel and other people have said on the stages. No one today who has wealth and is in position got here by like, sheer individual achievement. It was wealth being passed down and wealth that was granted, whether it be a land grant. We talked about earlier, the National Park Service has 90 million living descendants of the Homestead Act, which are like all European Americans, essentially, right? The U.S. population is 330 million. So that's like a third of the U.S. population got all of their wealth, or most of their wealth, from land grants that were given out for the Homestead Act, right? So when we understand like this, and we understand not only what we're owed, there's no amount of bootstrapism that you can do to close the racial wealth gap or to even pay off reparations, right? And that's not the point. We are owed a debt that even if we could individually achieve that, let's say we could individually do all of those tremendous acts, we are still owed reparations because it's a debt that's owed, not based on what we can individually achieve. It's something that is fundamentally owed. So, Divine, I really appreciate you sharing that perspective because it hits home, and it's really important that we understand that we are owed this regardless of what we can achieve individually or collectively. Brandon, you have one more last thought before we start to sign out?
Yes, I was wondering if Marcel or any of you guys are familiar with Ta-Nehisi Coates.
Oh, yeah,
the
definitely.
writer who wrote the Case for Reparations.
Yeah, definitely.
And if you're familiar with, if you've been in contact with him before, because
I haven't been in contact with him.
I think journalists can really bring. I'm in school for journalism at Northwestern right now, University in Chicago, and we have a really prestigious journalism program. And I'm thinking about writing about reparations and releasing some content about it.
You should do it. Definitely do it. So I'll say this. So I mean, I respect Ta-Nehisi Coates. You know, he kind of woke a lot of mainly white people up. You know what I mean? You know, we already knew what we were owed, but he spread the word, the good news, so to speak. You know, in his interview that he did with Obama basically kind of like shat on the idea, so to speak, right? The point is, though, like we shouldn't let these things stop us. Like we have to continue the work of our ancestors, and I would encourage you definitely to write about this. I think journalism is super important. The Black Panther Party, they left us a great legacy. They had the Black Panther Party and the Black Panther Party newspaper. And at one point, it was the most circulated newspaper in the entire country, 250,000 people a week. And so that level of being able to get the word out, educate people, he did a great job in his Atlantic article. You know, I would definitely encourage you, share the word, spread the word, you know, cover what's going on in the reparation space and talk about this. You've asked really good questions. So, you know, you can think about this in terms of like what needs to be done. So definitely encourage you to do that.
Marcel, are you familiar with Ta-Nehisi Coates, and are you interested in speaking with him?
Yes to both. Now, you know, to be honest, and by the way, your college, someone reached out to me from your university. It was a lady. I mean, she set up this big interview and all, and I was excited. You see, I'm not for everybody. I'm not the cookie cutter, say the right thing, play it safe type person. I don't aim to be that person. As even some of my supporters are learning, I don't walk on eggshells around people. I'm not here to say what makes people feel good. I'm not here to be your friend. I'm here to do what's going to get reparations done. And that means I'm going to be offending people. So I forgot your colleague's name. It was a white lady. She probably took one look at my Twitter account and said, what the hell? This guy's first office? You see me cursing people out and talk about news and say, okay, whoa, man. So, yeah, someone from because you mentioned you have prestigious journalism programs, and this lady reached out to me from your university, but, I mean, Northwestern. Yeah, Northwestern, yep, that's exactly. Is it over there in Washington State?
It's in Chicago, Illinois.
Okay, well, it was definitely Northwestern. We went through the whole. She sent me some app where you click on a link to arrange her time, and then she just vanished. And this lady is pretty published. Like she's written some pretty big articles. So I was excited, but I learned really quick. People will reach out to you for interviews and don't follow up, especially with someone like me. So that's fine.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. You know, we should always continue to do the work, no matter what obstacles we come across. They're always going to pop up. But I think that's cool that at least you know, that connection. At least that means that there's some good energy where you're at, Brandon. So take advantage of it and definitely spread the word through your journalism.
Okay. And
Huh?
You said you've talked to Ta-Nehisi Coates personally before?
No. I've never spoken with him. The reason I brought that up, I doubt he'll be wanting to speak with me because he seemed like he's one of them, like, one of those play it safe, don't step on the field. I respect that he talked to our referees because he kind of helped bring it back to the spotlight. But even Dr. Darity has told me I'm a little, I don't know what the word is, too radical for them. Dr. Darity told me that. I don't know how if Ta-Nehisi Coates would engage with me because some people say I'm just way too radical. So Dr. Darity said, you kind of come off as far right. I said I'm not far right, I'm just right.
Hey, that's hilarious, myself. I'm gonna use that. I'm not far, I'm right. I'm right. All right. So with that, y'all, I think we got to really understand there's a lot of work to do. Please don't get distracted on these Twitter streets. We are literally going through a genocide. We have what we're owed and what's going to grow in interest as time goes on. So with that, just stay focused, put in the work, join our Trace Your Lineage challenge for February for Black History Month. Share your story about who you are and how you discovered your lineage. It's going to be a great thing. So we'll be back tomorrow, 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 Eastern. So please join us again.
Also, please go to our website, freedmen.party. Please just go check it out. We got a couple of initiatives on there, and there's a lot of information on there that you can check out. That's it.
Yeah, thank you for that, A Boogie. Definitely check out our website. You can sign up to join the Freedmen Party. Also, check out our policy page, our Freedmen Agenda. If you're interested in running for office, like Marcel said earlier, we have a candidate boot camp. We've had about 85 people go through it so far. Our goal is to have at least 10,000 people go through it by the primaries in 2024. So if you're interested, please check it out. Yeah, Brandon, check it out. Actually, let me put it in the Jumbotron before we get out of here, and that way y'all can follow up and check it out. Give me 1 second. Copy. Okay, so this should be in the Jumbotron in like a second or two, but check out that link, and yeah, if you're interested in running, you're gonna definitely like what we've come up with so far. We tried to teach as much as we can and give everybody a foundation for running for office. With that, y'all, thank y'all for coming. Really appreciate everyone who came up to the stage and spoke. Thank you for my co-hosts A Boogie and Marcel. Shout out to Divine, U.S. Freedmen Project. Sincerely Black Love, I see you down there. Miss T, Miss Giselle, D White, I see y'all. Yeah, everybody else that I can't shout out, there's over 100 people in here. Please have a blessed day. Thank y'all for coming, and check in tomorrow in our space, 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 Eastern. All right, peace.